In the long history of human thought, few relationships have shaped civilization as deeply as the bond between Plato and Aristotle. Teacher and student, visionary and critic, idealist and empiricist. Together, they formed the intellectual backbone of Western philosophy. Yet the true drama of their relationship lies not in harmony, but in rupture. Because Aristotle did not merely learn from Plato. He dismantled Plato's world and rebuilt it on entirely different foundations. Plato was born into an Athens wounded by war and moral collapse. Democracy had executed his teacher, Socrates, and the city seemed to Plato a place ruled by ignorance and appetite. From this disillusionment emerged his grand vision. Reality itself was flawed. The world of the senses, Plato believed, was not truly real. True reality existed beyond sight and touch, in the eternal, perfect realm of forms. Justice, beauty, truth, goodness. These were not human inventions, but timeless ideals. What we see around us are only pale shadows of these higher truths. To preserve and transmit this vision, Plato founded the Academy, the first great philosophical institution in the Western world. It was here that a young man from Stagira arrived, quiet, observant, relentless in his questioning. His name was Aristotle. For nearly 20 years, Aristotle studied under Plato. He absorbed his teacher's methods, admired his brilliance, and mastered his arguments. But inwardly, something troubled him. Plato asked students to turn away from the physical world. Aristotle could not. He watched plants grow, animals move, governments rise and fall. He saw patterns not in heaven, but on earth. While Plato pointed upward toward ideals, Aristotle looked outward toward nature. And slowly, respectfully, but decisively, Aristotle began to disagree. Plato believed knowledge was recollection, the soul remembering truths it had known before birth. Aristotle rejected this outright. For him, the mind at birth was not filled with forgotten knowledge. It was a blank potential. Knowledge began with the senses. We learn by seeing, touching, comparing, categorizing. Truth emerges not from escaping the world, but from studying it carefully. This was more than a philosophical disagreement. It was a revolution in how humans approach reality. Plato's universe was vertical. At the top stood the form of the good, radiant and absolute. Below it were all other forms. At the bottom lay the physical world, unstable and deceptive. Aristotle flattened this hierarchy. He argued that form and matter could not be separated. A tree's treeness did not exist in a distant realm. It existed within the tree itself. Meaning was not elsewhere. It was here. In ethics, the split grew sharper. Plato imagined an ideal society ruled by philosopher kings, rare minds trained to grasp absolute truth. Aristotle found this unrealistic, even dangerous. Humans were not made for perfection, he argued, but for balance. Virtue was not an abstract ideal. It was a habit developed through practice. Courage lay between cowardice and recklessness. Generosity between greed and waste. This doctrine, the golden mean, shifted ethics from the heavens to daily life. Politics followed the same fault line. Plato distrusted democracy, seeing it as mob rule that killed Socrates. Aristotle was more measured. He studied constitutions empirically, analyzing dozens of real city-states. No perfect system existed, he concluded. Only systems that worked better or worse depending on circumstances. Good governance was practical, not ideal. When Plato died, Aristotle did not inherit the academy. Instead, he left Athens. Years later, he returned to found his own school, the Lyceum. If Plato's academy trained minds to contemplate eternal truths, Aristotle's Lyceum trained minds to observe, classify, and explain the world as it is. Students walked as they learned. Knowledge was collected, catalogued, debated. Biology, logic, physics, politics, rhetoric. No field was beyond Aristotle's curiosity. The break between teacher and student was now complete. And yet, it was not betrayal. Aristotle famously said, "Plato is dear to me, but dearer still is truth." This was not rebellion for its own sake. It was loyalty to a deeper principle. Philosophy must follow reality, not tradition. In breaking Plato's world, Aristotle preserved philosophy itself. The consequences were enormous. Plato shaped Christianity, mysticism, and theories of ideal justice. Aristotle shaped science, medicine, logic, and empirical inquiry. Medieval Europe would later rediscover Aristotle through Islamic scholars and rebuild universities around his works. The modern scientific method owes more to Aristotle's insistence on observation than to any other ancient thinker. Yet the tension between them never disappeared. We still live between Plato and Aristotle. When we believe in universal human rights, we echo Plato. When we demand evidence and data, we follow Aristotle. When we chase perfect ideals, we are Platonists. When we adjust policies to reality, we are Aristotelians. The student did not erase the master, he balanced him. In the end, Plato gave humanity its dreams. Aristotle taught it how to walk. And civilization, somehow, needed both. If you listen closely, every serious debate about truth, morality, science, or society still carries their voices. One whispering of eternal ideals beyond the world, the other reminding us to look carefully at the ground beneath our feet. Close your eyes. Let the walls of your room dissolve into the violet twilight of Attica. It is late summer, 367 BC, and the heat of the day is finally lifting, rising off the limestone in shimmering waves, leaving behind the scent of dry pine needles, cooling earth, and the faint, salty tang of the Aegean Sea drifting up from the harbor. We are standing on a dusty road just outside the walls of Athens, watching a young man walk towards the city gates. He is 17 years old, though his eyes hold a sharpness that makes him seem older. He is dressed in fine linen, perhaps a little too fine for a serious philosopher. And on his fingers, he wears rings that catch the dying light, a small detail that the serious Athenians might later gossip about, suggesting that this genius from the north was also undeniably a bit of a dandy. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. Now, breathe in the air of this ancient evening. Can you smell the smoke from the cooking fires beginning to curl over the rooftops? This is not the Athens of the Golden Age, the confident empire that ruled the seas a generation ago. That city died in the war. The Athens that this young traveler, Aristotle, is approaching is a survivor, a city of broken marble and mended pride. The Great War with Sparta ended decades ago, but the psychological wounds have not yet healed, and the long walls, once the symbol of Athenian invincibility, still bear the scars of destruction, though the stones are being restacked by weary hands. The people walking past our traveler look tired, their conversations hushed, their eyes scanning the ground rather than the horizon. It is a city that has learned the hard way that democracy can make terrible mistakes. like the execution of Socrates 32 years prior, a ghost that still haunts every street corner. Aristotle does not know this ghost personally, but he has come to find the man who does. He has traveled all the way from Stagira, a small coastal town far to the north in Chalcidice. Imagine the journey he has just survived. Weeks of tossing on the erratic Aegean waves, clutching his most prized possessions. Not gold, but scrolls. He is an orphan, his father Nicomachus having died years ago. And while most young men of his wealth would be managing estates or racing horses, Aristotle is driven by a hunger that food cannot satisfy. He has come to the city of words because he has heard of a school in the woods, a place called the Academy. Historians still argue whether Aristotle arrived with the intention of becoming a philosopher, or if he merely sought a liberal education before returning north to become a court advisor. But the wind seems to know his fate better than he does. It pushes him forward, past the noisy market sellers, packing up their olives and figs, past the temples where sacrifices are burning, and towards the quiet northwest outskirts. He is walking into history, but tonight he is just a tired student with dusty sandals, looking for a place to sleep. The sun dips below the mountains, painting the Parthenon in shades of bruised purple and gold, a fortress of gods watching over a city of men who are slowly, painfully learning to think. To understand the sanctuary Aristotle is approaching, we must first step back into the shadow that covers it. A shadow cast by a single cup of poison, consumed 32 years before the young student's arrival. Let the timeline drift backward, dissolving the purple twilight of 367 BC into the stark, harsh noon of 399 BC. We are in a prison cell carved into the rock of the Hill of the Muses, a damp and cramped space where the air smells of mildew and impending grief. Here sits Plato, not the venerable old master with the white beard we see in marble busts, but a young man of 28, broad-shouldered and intense, a former wrestler whose very name, Platon, means broad, a nickname given for his expansive chest, or perhaps the width of his forehead. But today, the wrestler is paralyzed by a blow no shield could block. He is watching his teacher, Socrates, prepare to die. The city of Athens, the democracy that prides itself on freedom and wisdom, has voted to execute its most famous questioner on trumped-up charges of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods. For the young Plato, this is the moment the world breaks. He watches as the jailer grinds the hemlock, a plant that grows wild in the ditches of Attica, turning nature itself into an instrument of state murder. The historical accounts tell us that Plato was actually sick that day, absent from the final moments, perhaps overwhelmed by a fever brought on by sheer emotional collapse. But the scene is burned into his mind with the clarity of a hallucination. He envisions Socrates taking the cup without a tremor in his hand, speaking calmly about the immortality of the soul, while his friends weep uncontrollably in the corner as the poison takes effect, numbing the old man's feet, then his legs, creeping upward like a cold tide. Plato feels something dying within himself too, his faith in the physical world. How could a world be real or good if it allows the most just man in Athens to be killed by a jury of confused, angry shopkeepers and politicians? It is a question that screams in the silence of his mind. This trauma becomes the invisible foundation of everything Aristotle will later encounter. Plato's philosophy is not born in a library. It is born in this prison cell, forged in the fires of grief and betrayal. After the execution, Plato flees Athens. The city he loved has become a monster to him, a great beast governed by the irrational moods of the mob. For 12 years, he becomes a wanderer, a ghost drifting across the Mediterranean map. Close your eyes and imagine the textures of his exile, the rough, sun-baked decks of merchant ships, the blinding white sands of Egypt where he supposedly spoke with priests who told him that the Greeks were merely children in the history of time, and the geometrically perfect temples of Italy where he met the Pythagoreans. These mystics taught him that numbers never lie, never betray, and never drink hemlock. A triangle is eternally a triangle. The sum of its angles does not change because a jury votes on it. Here, in the abstract purity of mathematics, the grieving Plato finally finds a safe harbor. He begins to construct a new map of reality, one where the messy, chaotic, unfair world of human politics is just a flawed copy of a perfect, invisible realm. This is the birth of the theory of forms, a desperate, beautiful attempt to build a fortress where Socrates is safe, where justice is an eternal, unbreakable object, not a word to be twisted by lawyers. Historians still argue over the exact itinerary of these lost years. Some claim the stories of him selling oil in Egypt are later inventions, but the psychological journey is undeniable. He left Athens a shattered politician. He returns a mystic. When he finally steps back onto Athenian soil, he is 40 years old. He does not return to the assembly to shout over the crowds or run for office. Instead, he turns his back on the Acropolis. He walks about a mile outside the city walls, past the Dipylon Gate, to a quiet grove of olive and plane trees dedicated to a local hero named Hecademos. It is a public park, a place for exercise and shade, but Plato claims it for a higher purpose. He buys a small plot of nearby land, gathers a few like-minded souls, and establishes a community dedicated to the one thing Athens had tried to kill, the relentless pursuit of truth. He calls it the Academy. It is not a university in the modern sense. There are no tuition fees, no degrees, no rigid semesters. It is more like a religious guild or a very intense book club that never ends. But make no mistake, this is not just a school. It is a quarantine zone. Plato creates a space where the noise of the city, the shouting of the fishmongers, the lies of the politicians, the weeping of the plays, cannot penetrate. Here, amidst the sound of cicadas and the rustle of silver-green olive leaves, reality is being redesigned. The trauma of Socrates' death has hardened into a rigorous intellectual discipline. Plato decides that if the world of the senses is a lie, then he will train a new generation to close their eyes and see with the mind alone. He wants to breed a new kind of human, a philosopher king, who is immune to the corruption of the mob because his gaze is fixed on eternal things. It is into this fortress of high idealism, built on the grief of a wrestler poet, that the teenage Aristotle is now walking. He does not know about the hemlock's cold creep or the years of exile. He only sees the trees and the gate. He is a boy who loves the world, the feel of a shell, the anatomy of a bird, the logic of a shifting tide. And he is about to enter a school built by a man who is trying desperately to escape it. The irony is as thick as the evening air. The student who loves the earth is coming to the master who loves the sky. And as the stars begin to prick the canopy of the night above the olive grove, the stage is set for the most polite, profound, and devastating collision in the history of the human mind. Step off the noisy road now, away from the dust and the donkey carts, and step into the shade. We are entering the sacred grove of Hecademos, a place where the sunlight struggles to pierce the thick canopy of plane trees and ancient olives, creating a perpetual dappled twilight that feels separate from the rest of the world. The air here is different, cooler, smelling of damp earth, river water from the nearby Cephissus, and the faint, sweet scent of incense lingering from the shrines to the muses. This is the Academy. It is not a building with a grand marble facade, but a garden, a sanctuary where the boundaries between a gymnasium and a temple blur into one. As we walk deeper into the grove, the roar of Athens fades into a distant hum, replaced by the rhythmic scratching of cicadas and the soft murmur of low voices debating the nature of the soul. It is here, at the threshold of this leafy cathedral, that legend tells us a sign was hung over the entrance, or perhaps inscribed into a stone pillar, bearing a warning that has echoed down the centuries. Let no one ignorant of geometry enter here. Historians still debate whether this sign physically existed or if it was a later myth embroidered by admiring Neoplatonists. But in spirit, the warning was very real. It was the first barrier, the first test of the initiate. To Plato, geometry was not merely a subject to be learned like pottery or farming. It was a spiritual cleansing, a way to scrub the mind clean of the messy, unreliable evidence of the senses. Think of a triangle. If you draw one in the sand at your feet, it will be imperfect. The lines will have thickness. The angles will wobble over the grains of dirt, and a gust of wind could blow it away. But the idea of the triangle, the perfect three-sided form where the angles add up to exactly two right angles, that exists nowhere in the sand. It exists only in the mind. It is eternal, indestructible, and pure. Plato believed that if you could train your mind to see that invisible triangle, you were one step closer to seeing the good, the true, and the beautiful. So the Academy was, in essence, a sanctuary of geometers, a place where grown men sat in the dirt, staring at diagrams, trying to unlock the architecture of the universe. Imagine the scene that would have greeted a visitor. Scattered groups of students, wearing simple cloaks, walking slowly along the gravel paths, or sitting on the stone benches of the exedra. They are not memorizing textbooks, for there are hardly any books to be had. They are engaged in dialectic, a relentless, polite, verbal wrestling match where ideas are tested until they break or prove themselves true. There is a quiet intensity here, a feeling of high stakes. In the city, men argue about the price of fish or the movement of Spartan troops. But here, under the rustling leaves, they argue about the definition of courage, the nature of justice, and the structure of the cosmos. It is a monastery before monks existed, a commune of the mind, where the only currency is the ability to sustain a logical argument. The lifestyle is simple, bordering on austere, designed to keep the body quiet so the soul can speak. We know they ate together, communal meals called syssitia, where the food was healthy but plain: olives, figs, barley bread, perhaps a little watered wine, and cheese. There is a gentle historical joke that survives from a comic playwright of the time, Epicrates, who mocked the Academy students for examining a pumpkin in deep silence, trying to determine its pumpkinness, while the rest of Athens was busy living life. But the students didn't care about the mockery. They were part of a brotherhood, the philoi, or friends, united by a charismatic, melancholic genius who moved among them not as a distant god, but as a fellow seeker. Plato himself is here, walking the grounds, perhaps pausing to draw a diagram in the dust with a cane, his brow furrowed. He is in his 60s now, his wrestling physique softened by age, but his presence is magnetic. He does not preach. He questions. He prods. He forces you to look inward. He has created this sanctuary because he believes the world outside is a cave of shadows, and he is trying to build a ladder of logic to climb out of it. The atmosphere is heavy with the reverence for the abstract. To enter this space is to agree to a strange contract. You must be willing to believe that what you touch with your hands is less real than what you see with your mind. It is a place of profound silence, punctuated only by the sharp why of the master. Into this atmosphere of high ethereal geometry, the young Aristotle is about to bring his own baggage. He is not ignorant of geometry. His mind is razor sharp. But he comes from a lineage of doctors, the Asclepiads, men who did not look for truth in the abstract clouds, but in the blood, bone, and bile of patience. He brings with him the smell of the sea and the habits of a collector. While the Platonists are trying to close their eyes to the world to see the forms, Aristotle is the kind of young man who keeps his eyes wide open, noticing the specific shape of the olive leaf, the way the beetle moves across the stone, the color of the lizard on the wall. He is standing at the edge of the grove, about to cross the line that separates the physical from the metaphysical. The sanctuary of the geometers is a place of perfect stillness, frozen in the eternal truth of mathematics. But the boy stepping through the gate is pure potential energy, a variable that this equation has not yet accounted for. The wind shifts in the trees, turning the silver undersides of the olive leaves towards the fading light, a million tiny mirrors flashing in the dusk. It is a moment of suspension, the breath before the plunge. The academy is waiting. The sand is smoothed over in the wrestling pit, ready for new diagrams. The silence is deep and inviting, promising answers to questions that Aristotle hasn't even learned how to ask yet. He adjusts his cloak, shakes the road dust from his sandals, though he can never quite shake the dust of the earth from his soul, and steps forward. The greatest intellectual apprenticeship in history is about to begin, not with a clash of swords, but with the quiet crunch of gravel under a young man's foot as he crosses the boundary into the kingdom of the mind. The integration of the young Macedonian into the quiet, rhythmic life of the academy was not a splash, but a steady, soaking permeation, like ink spreading through a porous page. Aristotle was 17, an age when the blood usually runs hot with the desire for glory or distraction. Yet he settled into the routine of the grove with a terrifying intensity that immediately set him apart from the casual dilettantes and the wealthy Athenian sons who came to the academy merely to polish their rhetoric for politics. There was something distinct about him, a frantic hunger that seemed to vibrate beneath his meticulously groomed cloak. Legend and ancient gossip tell us that he was a man of particular, perhaps even fussy, habits. He supposedly wore rings on multiple fingers, kept his hair fashionably short, in a style that was not quite Athenian, and spoke with a slight lisp that softened the edges of his fierce intellect. But it was not his appearance that drew the whisper of the other students, or the watchful eye of the masters. It was his relationship with the written word. In the 4th century BC, philosophy was still largely a creature of the mouth and the ear. It was a living breath. Socrates, the grandfather of this lineage, had never written down a single word, believing that truth could only be found in the active fire of conversation, in the face-to-face dismantling of a soul. Plato had written dialogues, yes, but he viewed them as compromised echoes of the real thing, famously warning in his Phaedrus that writing would destroy human memory, creating a generation of people who appeared wise but knew nothing, having outsourced their minds to papyrus. Into this culture of orality walked Aristotle, the first great collector, the first man who wanted to hold the universe in his hands in the form of a scroll. He did not just listen, he read. He read with a voracity that was almost suspicious. While others spent their evenings in the symposia, drinking wine and reciting poetry, Aristotle withdrew to his quarters, lighting the oil lamp that would become his trademark companion. Imagine the scene in the deepening night of the academy grounds. The crickets are chanting their rhythmic chorus. The moonlight is silvering the statues of the muses, and most of the students are asleep on their straw pallets. But in one window, a small orange flame flickers. Inside, surrounded by the smell of dry papyrus and cedar oil, used to preserve the fragile scrolls from worms, sits Aristotle. He is unrolling a treatise, perhaps a medical text from his father's library, or a dense poem by Parmenides. Reading in the ancient world was not the passive, silent act we know today. There were no spaces between words, no punctuation, no lowercase letters to guide the eye. A scroll was a continuous river of capital letters, a block of text that required intense concentration to decipher, often demanding that the reader mutter the sounds aloud to hear where one word ended and the next began. So, if you stood outside his door, you might have heard a low, rhythmic mumbling, the sound of a young man chewing on knowledge, digesting the thoughts of dead men. This was a radical shift in the architecture of learning. Aristotle was buying books, accumulating a personal library in a time when books were rare, expensive, and difficult to acquire. He was treating knowledge not as a ritual, but as data. Plato, watching this strange, introverted industry from a distance, is said to have given his new student a nickname. He did not call him the orator or the wrestler. He called him the mind, nous, and later, with a mixture of admiration and perhaps a trace of wary irony, he referred to Aristotle's house as the house of the reader. This label, the reader, was heavy with meaning. It marked the moment philosophy began to turn from a performance into a profession, from a conversation into a library. Historical debate still lingers over how much access Aristotle had to Plato himself in these early years. Plato was often away in Sicily, entangled in disastrous political experiments, which meant Aristotle was often left alone with the texts. This solitude forged his character. He became the autodidact of the academy, the student who learned not just from the living master, but from the accumulated wisdom of the centuries. He read the pre-Socratic philosophers who claimed the world was made of water or air or fire. He read the histories of Herodotus. He read the tragic poets. And as he read, he began to do something that would eventually shatter the unity of Plato's world. He began to compare. A listener accepts what is said in the moment. A reader can look back. A reader can check the inconsistencies. A reader can pause time, roll the scroll back, and say, "But here you said X, and there you said Y." In the quiet isolation of his room, bathed in the scent of burning olive oil, the critical distance between student and master began to open up, fueled by the silence of the page. Yet, this was not a time of conflict, but of immense, sponge-like absorption. Aristotle was falling in love with the sheer magnitude of what could be known. He was discovering that he had a unique gift, perhaps the greatest gift a scientist can have, the ability to be bored by nothing. A list of Olympic victors. He would read it, a treatise on the winds. He would read it, a genealogy of Spartan kings. He would read it. While Plato's other students were trying to transcend the world to reach the divine, Aristotle was trying to read the world, line by line, scroll by scroll. There is a gentle humor in visualizing this intense young man, perhaps squinting slightly in the dim light, surrounded by mounting piles of papyrus that threatened to topple over, creating a fortress of facts around his bed. He was the original academic, the patron saint of the late-night study session, and though he was surrounded by the most brilliant talkers in Greece, he found his deepest communion with the silent voices of the past. The reader had arrived, and without knowing it, he was preparing to write the encyclopedia of reality. But for now, he is just a student with tired eyes, blowing out the lamp as the first grey light of dawn touches the Acropolis, his mind buzzing with the electric thrill of a new idea, drifting off to sleep in a room that smells of ink and dusty history, while the birds of the academy crowns begin to sing the sun awake, unaware that the man sleeping beneath them would one day write the definitive book on their anatomy. The oil lamp is extinguished, and the cool, studious solitude of the night gives way to the overwhelming, bleaching radiance of the Athenian noon. We must now step out of Aristotle's private library and into the open courtyard of the academy, where the shadows are short and sharp, and the cicadas are screaming their static-filled song in the heat. It is time to attend the lecture that defines the era. Imagine sitting on a warm stone bench, the limestone gritty beneath your fingertips, squinting against the glare. In the center of the gathering stands Plato. He is not reading from a scroll. He is weaving a spell. He points a finger toward the sky, not at the clouds, but at the sun itself, that blinding, burning disk that rules the Greek day. This is the moment where the reader must become the seer, and it is here that the young Aristotle encounters the central pillar of his master's universe, the theory of forms. Plato asks his students to consider a simple, unsettling question. Why do we recognize a beautiful horse, or a beautiful vase, or a beautiful act of courage? How do we know they are beautiful? The horse will grow old and lame. The vase will shatter. The courageous act will be forgotten. If the physical examples of beauty are temporary and flawed, where does the concept of beauty come from? It cannot come from the objects themselves. Therefore, Plato argues, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, there must be another place, a realm beyond the sky, the Hyper-Uranian, where the form of beauty exists. It is perfect, changeless, eternal. It is the original mold, and everything we see in this dusty, sun-baked world is merely a clumsy copy, a shadow cast by that perfect reality. To listen to Plato is to feel the ground beneath you dissolve. He tells you that the stone you are sitting on is not truly real. It is just a ghost of the form of stoneness. The love you feel for your family is just a dim reflection of the form of love. For a young man like Aristotle, whose mind is attuned to the crunch of facts and the texture of specimens, this is a dizzying, almost nauseating inversion of gravity. He is being told that the world he can touch is a lie, and the world he cannot see is the truth. There is a famous story, debated by historians, but emotionally resonant, concerning Plato's public lecture on the good. It is said that a crowd of Athenians gathered, expecting to hear practical advice on happiness, wealth, or health. Instead, Plato subjected them to hours of relentless, abstract mathematics and astronomy, arguing that the good was ultimately a mathematical unity, identifiable with the number 1. The crowd, baffled and bored, slowly drifted away, leaving only the hardcore disciples. This moment captures the friction of the academy. It was a place where you were asked to abandon your common sense to find a higher sense. Aristotle sits there, perhaps shifting his weight on the bench, his sharp eyes fixed on the master. He is trying. He is trying to see the invisible triangle that has no thickness. He is trying to love the form of the good more than the good things of the earth. But it is a struggle. We can imagine a touch of gentle humor here. The pragmatic Aristotle trying to force his brain to float into the ether, while a small part of him is distracted by a particularly interesting spider weaving a web between 2 columns, a spider that is defying the theory of forms by being perfectly, beautifully real in its intricate engineering. Yet, the power of Plato's vision is undeniable. It is not just philosophy, it is therapy for a broken world. Remember the trauma of the hemlock. If the world is just shadows, then the death of Socrates was just the breaking of a shadow. The real Socrates, the soul, is safe in the realm of forms. This teaching offers a profound, aching comfort. It promises that nothing good is ever truly lost. It is just returned to the library of heaven. Aristotle feels the pull of this majestic sadness. He understands the emotional architecture. Plato is building a fortress in the sky where no government can kill the just. But as the lecture ends and the students disperse into the olive groves to debate, a seed of resistance begins to germinate in Aristotle's chest, not out of disrespect, but out of a different kind of reverence. He looks at the sun, and he doesn't see a metaphor for the good. He sees a burning ball of fire that warms the crops and drives the weather. He looks at the horse, and he doesn't see a failed copy of a divine horse. He sees a magnificent biological machine that deserves to be studied on its own terms. The tension is subtle, like a hairline fracture in a vase, invisible at a distance but fatal in the long run. The master points up, urging the soul to fly. The student looks down, wondering why the earth feels so solid if it is meant to be an illusion. The sun beats down on both of them, the dreamer and the observer, illuminating the widening gap between the man who wants to leave the cave and the man who wants to measure it. Descend now. Let the blinding Aegean sun of the courtyard fade from your mind, replaced by the cool, damp breath of the underground. We are entering the most famous room in the history of philosophy, though it is a room that never existed in brick or stone. It is the cave. Plato is speaking again, perhaps pacing in the flickering light of an evening brazier, his voice dropping to a low rhythmic register that pulls his listeners into the dark. He invites Aristotle and the others to imagine a grim tableau. A row of prisoners chained since childhood in a deep cavern. They cannot move their heads. They can only stare forward at the rough limestone wall in front of them. Behind them, unseen, burns a fire. And between the fire and the prisoners, there is a raised walkway where others, puppeteers of reality, walk back and forth, holding up cut-out figures of wood and stone, shapes of horses, trees, warriors, and birds. The fire casts the shadows of these puppets onto the wall in front of the prisoners. The prisoners, having never seen anything else, believe these wavering, distorted grey shapes are the world. They give them names. They compete to see who can predict which shadow will come next. They honor the experts of shadows. They are totally, tragically mistaken. They are living inside a cinema of delusions, mistaking the projection for the reality. This is Plato's verdict on the human condition. We are the prisoners. The physical world we obsess over, the money we count, the bodies we desire, the politics we argue about, is just a puppet show on a cave wall. Listen to the crackle of that imaginary fire. Feel the stiffness in the necks of the prisoners. Plato describes the violence of education not as a gentle adding of facts, but as a forced liberation. Someone comes, a teacher, a Socrates, and breaks the chains. He compels the prisoner to stand up and turn around. This is the periagogue, the turning of the soul. It is not pleasant. It is agony. The firelight hurts eyes that are used to the dark. The prisoner is confused, angry. He wants to look back at the comfortable shadows, but he is dragged up the rough, steep path, out of the cave and into the sunlight. Here, the allegory explodes into blinding white. The prisoner is dazzled. At first, he can only look at reflections in the water, then at the stars, and finally, he looks at the sun itself. This is the encounter with the good. He realizes that the sun is the cause of everything, the seasons, the light, the life. He pities the men still down in the dark. He has seen the truth. But the story does not end in triumph. It ends in tragedy, a tragedy that Aristotle listens to with a heavy heart. The freed man goes back down. He returns to the cave to save his friends. But now, his eyes are filled with darkness after the sun. He stumbles. He looks foolish. He cannot identify the shadows anymore. The prisoners laugh at him. They say his journey up has ruined his eyes. And Plato adds with a chilling quietness, if he tries to free them, they will kill him. This is the scar of Socrates throbbing again. The man who saw the truth was murdered by the men who loved the shadows. For the students in the academy, this story is a call to arms. It tells them they are the chosen few, the ones brave enough to face the sun. But for Aristotle, sitting in the corner, the story lands differently. It is magnificent, yes. It is poetic, but it is also deeply disturbing. Historians and philosophers still debate whether the cave was meant as a metaphysical map of the universe or a bitter political critique of Athenian democracy. But Aristotle senses the danger in its dismissal of the immediate world. If the world down here is just a shadow, why is it so consistent? Why do the shadows have internal logic? Aristotle looks at the fire in the brazier, the real fire, not the metaphorical one. He watches the way the wood turns to ash, the way the smoke rises in a predictable spiral. He thinks about the cutout puppets. Even if they are fake, they are made of wood and stone. They have properties. They have substance. There is a subtle, unspoken tension in the room as Plato finishes the tale. Plato is telling them that to be a philosopher is to be an alien in your own city, a man who essentially dies to the world in order to understand it. Aristotle, young and vigorous, does not want to die to the world. He wants to live in it. He wants to understand the cave, not just leave it. He wonders, what if the shadows are not lies? What if they are clues? What if the way to understand the sun is not to turn away from the shadows, but to study the relationship between the light, the object, and the projection? The cave marks the emotional high-water mark of Plato's teaching, a vision of mystical ascent that is almost religious in its fervor. It creates a binary universe, the darkness of here versus the light of there. And while Aristotle is moved by the sheer narrative power of his master, a small stubborn part of him begins to plant his feet firmer on the ground. He thinks of the prisoners not with pity, but with curiosity. He wants to go down and talk to them, not to drag them out, but to ask them what they see. He wants to measure the shadows. He wants to analyze the fire. The silence that follows the allegory is thick. The students are contemplating the painful journey upward. Aristotle is contemplating the cave itself. He is beginning to suspect that the divine is not found by escaping the physical, but by penetrating it. The flickering light of the brazier catches his eye, and he doesn't see an illusion. He sees a chemical process, a transformation of matter, a reality that is burning right here, right now, hot and undeniable. The master wants to close his eyes to see the truth. The student is forcing his eyes to stay wide open, even in the dark. And as the night deepens over the academy, the first true divergence begins. One soul longing for flight, the other grounding itself for a long, careful excavation of the earth. While the academy's collective gaze is fixed on the eternal, unmoving heavens, striving to catch a glimpse of the perfect forms, Aristotle begins to do something that seems to his peers almost perversely retrograde. He looks down. He looks at the dirt. He looks at the slime. He looks at the writhing, buzzing, messy chaos of life that Plato considers a distraction. We must shift our cinematic lens now from the clean geometric diagrams in the sand to the sticky, wet reality of a tide pool or the undergrowth of the academy gardens. Imagine Aristotle, now in his 20s, his fine cloak perhaps tucked up around his waist, crouching in the mud near the banks of the Cephissus River. He is holding a creature, a frog, a beetle, or perhaps a simple sea squirt found on a weekend walk to the coast. To the other students, this is baffling. Why study a frog? A frog is a temporary, imperfect, noisy thing. It is born, it croaks, it dies. It has no eternal truth. It is not a triangle. But Aristotle sees something they do not. He sees a machine of infinite complexity. This is the birth of biology as a science. Before Aristotle, nature was the domain of poets who saw nymphs in the trees, or pre-Socratic thinkers who argued about whether everything was made of fire or air. Aristotle is the first man to simply look with the obsession of a watchmaker taking apart a timepiece to see what makes it tick. He breaks open a chicken egg at different stages of incubation, day by day, mapping the precise moment the heart begins to beat. A tiny red speck pulsing with life long before the bird is formed. He notes that the heart is the first organ to live and the last to die. He watches the way a chameleon changes color, not as a magic trick, but as a physiological reaction to fear or light. He catalogues the teeth of lions, the stomachs of ruminants, the reproductive arms of octopuses. There is a profound, quiet rebellion in this act. Plato teaches that the physical world is a place of decay and deception, a tomb of the soul. Aristotle, holding a glistening organ in his hand, finds not decay, but design. He discovers teleology, the idea that nature does nothing in vain. Every part has a purpose. The eagle's beak is curved to tear meat. The duck's bill is flat to sift mud. The form is not sitting in a heaven above the sky. The form is right here, hardwired into the flesh. The birdness is in the bird. This is a radical shift in the geography of the sacred. For Plato, the divine is out there. For Aristotle, the divine is in here, hidden in the intricate folding of an intestine or the geometric perfection of a bee's honeycomb. Historians of science often point out that Aristotle's biological works make up more than a quarter of his surviving writings. He was a biologist first and a philosopher second. In fact, some scholars argue that his entire logical system, his obsession with categories, with genus and species, came from his biological field trips. When you sort seashells, you learn to group them by shape, by color, by function. You learn that there is a hierarchy of being. Aristotle took this method of sorting shells and applied it to the universe. He categorized reality because he practiced on crabs. But imagine the social tension this must have caused in the high-minded academy. We can picture a scene of gentle, slightly disgusted humor. Aristotle walking into a lecture on the purity of the soul, smelling faintly of formaldehyde and low tide, his hands stained with the ink of a cuttlefish. The Platonists are discussing the music of the spheres. Aristotle is thinking about the digestive tract of a sea urchin. He famously defends this study in a later text, telling his students not to be childishly disgusted by the meaner animals. He says, "In all natural things there is something of the marvelous." It is a rebuke to the snobbery of the intellect. He is telling them that God is as present in a gnat's wing as he is in a star. There is a sensory richness to this period of his life that is often overlooked. While Plato's world is black and white, light and shadow, truth and lie, Aristotle's world is an explosion of color and texture. It is the iridescence of a fly's wing, the rough skin of a shark, the warm pulse of a mammalian artery. He is grounding philosophy in the senses. He argues that we cannot know anything about the world if we do not first trust our eyes and ears. There is nothing in the intellect, he will later imply, that was not first in the senses. This is the anti-cave. This is the argument that the shadows on the wall are real, and if you look at them closely enough, they will tell you the truth about the fire. As he crouches there, sketching the anatomy of a flower, Aristotle is doing more than botany. He is healing the wound Plato opened. He is saying that the world is not a trap. It is a textbook. And though he still reveres his master, a fundamental divergence is taking root in the soil of the garden. Plato wants to transcend nature. Aristotle wants to understand it. The teacher looks for the exit. The student looks for the manual. And in the quiet hum of the garden, amidst the crawling things and the growing leaves, the great empiricist is waking up, realizing that the truth is not a ghost to be chased, but a living thing to be held. The sun shifts across the floor of the exedra, lengthening the shadows of the columns until they stretch like dark fingers across the mosaic. And we move now from the solitary study of the garden to the electric tension of the seminar room. It is here, in the semicircle of stone benches where the brotherhood gathers, that the silence of assent begins to fracture. For years, the rhythm of the academy has been a call and response. Plato leads, and the students follow, climbing the ladder of dialectic toward the sky. But now, a new sound enters the harmony, a note of dissonance, not loud, but impossible to ignore. It is the voice of the student who has spent too much time looking at the ground. Imagine the scene. Plato is concluding a discourse on the nature of the forms, perhaps explaining how the physical world participates in the divine. He uses beautiful, poetic metaphors, the way a face reflects in a mirror, or the way many fires are lit from one source. The other students nod, mesmerized by the imagery. But Aristotle does not nod. He sits forward, his brow furrowed, his fingers toying with the stylus in his hand. He waits for the pause, that heartbeat of silence that follows a great insight, and he fills it with a question that sounds polite, almost apologetic, but which carries the weight of a sledgehammer. But master, he might say, his voice soft, if the forms are entirely separate from the things we see, how can they cause them? How does a perfect, non-physical horseness reach down from heaven and get inside a physical horse? Is it like a blanket thrown over the animal, or like a fluid poured into it? The room goes quiet. The scratching of styluses on wax tablets stops. This is the problem of separation, the crack in the foundation of Platonism that Aristotle has found by tapping on the walls. He is asking for the mechanism. He is a mechanic of reality, and he sees a missing gear. Plato, ever the patient wrestler, likely smiles. He enjoys a challenge. He tries to explain again. It is a relationship of likeness, of striving. The horse tries to be the form. But Aristotle presses on, gently, relentlessly. He introduces what historians of philosophy now call the third man argument. Though, in this moment, it is just a sketched diagram in the air. He argues, if we need a form of man to explain why these two men look alike, do we not then need a third form to explain the likeness between the men and the form, and then a fourth and a fifth? It is an infinite regress, a hall of mirrors where the explanation never actually lands on the ground. You can feel the shift in the air pressure of the room. The other students look from the old master to the young upstart. They are witnessing the parricide, the symbolic killing of the father. But it is not done with malice. It is done with a terrible, earnest necessity. Aristotle is not trying to humiliate Plato. He is trying to save him. He believes that by separating the truth from the world, Plato has made the world unknowable and the truth irrelevant. If the form of health exists only in the sky, it cannot cure a sick patient in Athens. This is the crux of the descent. Aristotle wants a philosophy that works. He wants a metaphysics that can explain why fire burns and why rain falls, not just why they are imperfect copies of a divine idea. We can imagine Plato's reaction, not anger, but perhaps a flicker of melancholic recognition. He sees the brilliance in the boy. He sees that he has trained a mind so sharp, it is now cutting the hand that sharpened it. There is a later, likely apocryphal story that claims Plato said, Aristotle has kicked me as a foal kicks its mother. Whether he said it or not, the sentiment rings true. It is the pain of every great teacher. To be surpassed, to be questioned, to watch the child grow into a rival. But in these early whispers, there is still love. The debate is conducted in the language of friendship. They are friends of the forms, even as they begin to tear them apart. The sun dips lower, turning the limestone pillars to gold, and the seminar breaks up. The students spill out into the twilight, whispering among themselves. Did you hear him? He thinks the forms are unnecessary. He thinks the truth is in the object. Aristotle walks alone, perhaps feeling the heavy burden of his own clarity. He does not want to break this world. He loves the academy. He loves the peace of the grove. But he cannot unsee what he has seen. He knows that a bridge that does not touch the ground is not a bridge. It is just a ruin in the air. And as the evening star rises, the same star Plato would call a god, and Aristotle would call a celestial body governed by physics, the gap between them widens. A silence growing in the heart of the conversation that will eventually split the history of Western thought in two. The sun has set, and the academy is bathed in the cool silver rinse of the moon. We move from the physical ground of the garden into the invisible, turbulent territory of the human interior. It is here, in the quiet conversations that happen after the lamps are lit, that the deepest rift between master and student begins to open, not over the nature of the world, but over the nature of the self. What are we? Are we ghosts trapped in meat, or are we living, breathing unities? Plato's answer is a story, one of the most beautiful and desperate myths ever told. Imagine him sitting in the circle of his favorite students, his face illuminated by the flickering oil lamp, his voice weaving the allegory of the Phaedrus. He tells them to close their eyes and picture a chariot racing across the rim of heaven. The charioteer is reason, the part of us that loves the truth. He holds the reins of two horses. One is white, noble, and obedient. This is thumos, our spiritedness, our courage, our desire for honor. The other horse is black, wild and ugly, with bloodshot eyes and shaggy ears. This is eros, our dark appetites, our lust, our greed. The life of the soul, Plato whispers, is a violent, eternal struggle. The charioteer is constantly fighting to keep the horses on the path, to fly upward toward the forms. But the black horse drags the chariot down, toward the earth, toward the heavy, sticky pleasures of the body. In Plato's vision, the body is not just a vessel, it is a cage. He plays on the Greek words soma, body, and sema, tomb. We are dead souls, trapped in a living coffin, looking through the bars of our eyes, longing to escape back to the stars where we belong. Death, for the Platonist, is not an end. It is a liberation. It is the moment the prison door swings open and the charioteer is finally free to fly. There is a profound melancholy in this view, a sense of being an exile in one's own skin. It resonates deeply with anyone who has ever felt that the world is too harsh, or that their body is failing them. It offers the ultimate hope, that the real you is immortal, untouched by the decay of the flesh. Aristotle listens. He understands the poetry. He feels the pull of the metaphor. But his mind, trained on the dissection table and the tide pool, cannot accept the separation. He looks at his own hand, the way the muscles flex, the way the skin heals, the way the fingers grasp the stylus. He does not see a prison. He sees a miracle of engineering. He does not feel like a ghost haunting a machine. He feels like a unified being. In his later work, De Anima, on the soul, Aristotle offers a counter-vision that is less romantic, but arguably more profound. He strips away the chariot and the horses. He asks a simple question. What makes a living thing different from a dead thing? If you look at a man who has just died, His body is still there. The bones, the muscles, the eyes, they are all present. But something is missing. That something, Aristotle argues, is not a separate ghost that has flown away. It is the form of the body. It is the capacity to function. He offers an analogy that shatters the Platonic dualism. Suppose, Aristotle says, that the eye were an entire animal. If the eye were an animal, then sight would be its soul. The soul is not a thing inside the eye. It is the power of the eye to see. If the eye is blinded, the soul is damaged. If the eye is destroyed, the soul is gone. You cannot have sight without an eye, just as you cannot have the shape of a statue without the bronze. Aristotle turns to a piece of wax and a signet ring. He presses the ring into the soft wax, leaving an impression. Can you separate the shape from the wax? He asks. Can you take the impression away and leave the wax behind? No, they are one. The soul is the shape. The body is the wax. They are inextricably fused. This is the doctrine of hylomorphism, matter and form combined. The implications are terrifying and exhilarating. If the soul is simply the form of the living body, the way a river is the form of the water flowing through the channel, then what happens when the banks collapse? What happens when the body dies? For Plato, the death of the body is the beginning of the soul's true life. For Aristotle, the death of the body is the end of the individual. When the eye is crushed, sight ceases to exist. When the man dies, his personality, his memories, his specific self dissolves. Historians still argue whether Aristotle left any room for immortality. He speaks briefly of a passive intellect that dies and an active intellect that is eternal. But it is a cold, impersonal eternity, like a light that returns to the sun, not a person who remembers their name. Imagine the tension in the room as Aristotle gently pushes back against the chariot myth. He is effectively telling his teacher, Master, there is no escape. We are here. We are this flesh. We are this blood. The dignity of human life is not in leaving the body, but in using it well. It is a shift from the vertical to the horizontal. Plato wants to starve the black horse to let the white horse fly. Aristotle wants to train both horses to run together. He does not want to repress the emotions or the appetites. He wants to harness them. Anger is good if it drives you to fight injustice. Desire is good if it leads you to create a family. The soul is not a war zone. It is a garden that must be cultivated. This is the moment the psychology of the West splits in two. On one side, the Platonic and later Christian view, the soul as a spiritual entity, a traveler passing through a weary world, seeking heaven. On the other, the Aristotelian and scientific view, the soul as the biological activity of life, the electrical storm in the brain, the rhythm of the breath, beautiful and finite. As the moon climbs higher, casting long, pale shadows across the academy grounds, the two men stand on opposite sides of the greatest question of all. Plato looks at death and sees a doorway. Aristotle looks at death and sees a horizon line, the point where the sea meets the sky and the sailing stops. It is a lonely thought, perhaps, but it gives Aristotle a fierce, burning urgency. If this is the only life we have, if the wax melts and the seal is lost forever, then we must make the impression deep. We must see everything, understand everything, and live fully right now. The chariot may fly, but the wax must hold the mark. And in the silence of the night, Aristotle resolves to make his mark indelible, The years are passing now, drifting like the yellow leaves of the plane trees that carpet the academy grounds every autumn. 1 year turns into 5, 5 into 10, 10 into nearly 20. It is crucial to feel the weight of this duration. Aristotle did not arrive, disagree, and leave. He stayed. He stayed long after he had mastered the curriculum, long after his beard had grown thick, and his own reputation had begun to eclipse that of the older students. He stayed because the academy was not a battlefield. It was a home, and the man at the center of it was not just a teacher. He was the sun around which Aristotle's life had orbited since boyhood. We often imagine intellectual revolutions as violent clashes, doors slamming, denunciations shouted in public squares. But the rift between Plato and Aristotle was something far more complex and poignant. It was a slow, heartbreaking drift born of profound love. Imagine them walking together in the late afternoon, the time of day the Greeks called opsia, when the light turns amber and the shadows stretch out, distorting the shapes of the world. Plato is now an old man, moving with the careful, measured gait of someone who has lived 80 years. He leans on a staff, his voice raspy, but still holding that hypnotic, poetic cadence that can silence a room. Aristotle walks beside him, now in his late 30s, vibrant, restless, his mind a coiled spring. They are talking, as they have for 2 decades. But the conversation has changed. It is no longer the student asking the master for answers. It is 2 equals navigating a widening silence. It is in this period that Aristotle faces the most difficult choice of his life. He is writing his Nicomachean Ethics, a work that will attempt to define the good life. He knows he must dismantle Plato's central doctrine, the idea of the good as a singular universal form, to build his own. To attack a colleague is sport. To attack a father figure is a kind of patricide. We can see Aristotle in his room, the stylus hovering over the wax tablet, hesitating. He knows that what he writes will hurt the man he loves. He struggles with the sentence. Finally, he presses the stylus down, carving the words that will echo through history. In the text, he apologizes before he even begins the argument. He writes that the inquiry is an uphill task because friends of his have introduced the forms. It is a tender admission. He acknowledges the bond. But then the steel shines through. He writes, "Yet it would perhaps be thought to be better, indeed to be our duty, for the sake of maintaining the truth, even to destroy what touches us closely, especially as we are philosophers or lovers of wisdom. For while both are dear, piety requires us to honor truth above our friends." Later tradition would compress this sentiment into the famous Latin maxim, amicus Plato, sed magis amica veritas. Plato is my friend, but truth is a better friend. It is one of the most devastatingly beautiful lines in the history of thought. It is not an insult. It is a declaration of independence that honors the teacher by obeying the teacher's highest command, to seek the truth, no matter the cost. Aristotle is effectively saying, I love you enough to disagree with you. You taught me to value reality above all else. Now I must honor that lesson by rejecting your view of reality. The atmosphere in the academy during these final years of their partnership must have been thick with this sophisticated tension. Historians often wonder why Aristotle wasn't expelled, or why he didn't leave sooner. The answer lies in the unique nature of the academy itself. It was not a cult of personality. It was a community of free speech, Parrhesia. Plato, to his eternal credit, did not want parrots. He wanted philosophers. There is a nobility in the old master, allowing his greatest student to dismantle his life's work under his own roof. It suggests a confidence that transcends vanity. Plato lightly looked at Aristotle and saw the necessary correction to his own excesses, the earth that would balance his sky. Yet, the personal pain must have been real. We can imagine the hushed conversations at the communal dinners. The other students, lesser minds, who treated Plato's word as gospel, lightly looked at Aristotle with suspicion, whispering that he was arrogant, that he had forgotten his place. They saw betrayal, where Aristotle saw loyalty to the Logos. Aristotle, for his part, must have felt a profound loneliness. To be the one who sees the crack in the foundation is a heavy burden when everyone else is busy admiring the architecture. There is a moment we can visualize, perhaps apocryphal, but emotionally true, where the two men sit together on a stone bench as the sun sets behind the olive trees. They watch the light fade. Plato sees the shadows lengthening and thinks of the cave, of how the dark is an illusion to be escaped. Aristotle sees the shadows and thinks of optics, of the angle of the sun, of the rotation of the earth. They are looking at the same world, but they are living in two different universes. They sit in silence, the comfortable silence of old friends who know they can no longer follow each other where they are going. Aristotle touches the rough stone of the bench, grounding himself. He knows that soon he will have to walk away. He knows that his love for the thisness of the world, the hexity, is incompatible with Plato's love for the thatness of the heavens. But for now, they are just two men, a teacher and a student, bound by a 20-year conversation that is slowly winding down to its final inevitable pause. The affection remains warm and genuine, but the truth has stepped between them, a silent third party that demands total allegiance. And Aristotle, with a heavy heart but a clear eye, has made his choice. He will choose the difficult, messy, complex truth of the world over the beautiful, perfect, comforting vision of his friend. We leave the quiet, shadowed bench of friendship and step out into the bustling, noisy, complicated chaos of the Athenian marketplace, the agora. Here, amidst the shouting of fishmongers, the haggling of cloth merchants, and the swagger of politicians, Aristotle finds the laboratory for his next great departure. Plato had sought virtue in the clouds, believing that to be good, one essentially had to become a monk of the mind, detaching oneself from the messy appetites of the world to contemplate the absolute form of the good. For Plato, ethics was like mathematics. There was one right answer, and it was the same for everyone, everywhere, forever. It was a vertical ascent toward a peak of purity. Aristotle, however, stands in the crowd and watches how human beings actually live. He sees that life is not a math problem. It is a moving target. He notices that the man who runs headlong into battle without a shield is not brave. He is dead. He notices that the man who hides in his basement to avoid danger is not prudent. He is a coward. He notices that the man who gives away all his money to every stranger is not generous. He is a fool who will soon be begging himself. And slowly, the great insight forms in his mind, a doctrine that will become the cornerstone of Western sanity, the doctrine of the golden mean. Close your eyes and picture a balance scale, or perhaps the string of a lyre. If the string is too loose, it makes no sound. If it is too tight, it snaps. The music the beauty, the virtue, lives in the tension between the two, in the precise, difficult middle. This is Aristotle's revolution in ethics. He argues that good behavior is not an extreme. It is a midpoint between two vices, one of excess and one of deficiency. Consider the soldier. Plato might ask him to contemplate the form of courage. Aristotle asks him to assess the situation. If the soldier has too much fear, he has the vice of cowardice. If he has too little fear, he has the vice of rashness, a kind of manic recklessness that endangers his comrades. True courage, Aristotle argues, is the golden mean, feeling the right amount of fear for the right reason at the right time and acting anyway. It is not the absence of fear. It is the mastery of it. This shift brings ethics down from the heavens and places it firmly in the hands of ordinary men and women. It is a profoundly forgiving and practical philosophy. It acknowledges that we are not gods, nor are we geometric shapes. We are creatures of varying temperatures. The right amount of food for a wrestler is too much for a scribe. The right amount of anger for a man watching an injustice is different from the anger of a man who stubbed his toe. Plato wants a universal rule. Aristotle wants a calibrated adjustment. There is a wonderful, earthy humor in this. While Plato is looking for a saint, Aristotle is looking for a gentleman, a man of practical wisdom, phronesis. He seems to say with a wry smile that being too good is actually a way of being bad. A person who can never get angry, even when their family is insulted, is not virtuous. They are a doormat. A person who is brutally honest in every single moment, telling you exactly how tired you look, is not truthful. They are a bore. Virtue requires social intelligence. It requires reading the room. But how do we find this elusive mean? Here, Aristotle introduces an idea that feels startlingly modern. Fake it until you make it. Plato believed that knowledge was enough. If you know the good, you will do the good. After all, who would knowingly hurt themselves? Aristotle, ever the observer of human frailty, disagrees. He knows that we often know what is right, but do the exact opposite because we are weak, lazy, or passionate. This is the problem of akraja, or weakness of will. So, Aristotle argues that virtue is not a momentary act of brilliance. It is a habit. We are what we repeatedly do. We do not become brave by reading a book about bravery. We become brave by doing brave things over and over again until it becomes second nature. We become builders by building. We become harpists by playing the harp. We become just by doing just acts. At first, it feels forced, like a child practicing scales, but eventually, the habit settles into the soul and the virtue becomes part of our character. This leads us to one of the most touching mysteries of his work. His great book on this subject is called the Nicomachean Ethics. Historians and scholars still debate affectionately over the title. Was it dedicated to his father, Nicomachus, who died when he was a boy? Or was it dedicated to his son, also named Nicomachus, who would die young in battle? The ambiguity adds a layer of poignant tenderness to the text. Is it a son remembering the father he lost, or a father trying to teach a son he will lose? Either way, the book is a gift of love, a manual on how to navigate the treacherous waters of human existence without crashing into the rocks of excess. Imagine Aristotle teaching this in the Lyceum years later, walking with his students. He points to a man eating a moderate lunch and says, "There is temperance between the glutton and the ascetic." He points to a man accepting an award with grace and says, "There is magnanimity between vanity and false modesty." He is building a map of human behavior that is complex, nuanced, and forgiving. Plato's ethics felt like a steep mountain climb, where only a few could reach the snowy summit. Aristotle's ethics feel like walking a tightrope. It requires constant micro-adjustments, constant awareness, and a strong core. But it is a path that can be walked right here, in the city, among friends. He does not ask us to be perfect. He asks us to be balanced. He asks us to flourish, eudaimonia, not by escaping our humanity, but by perfecting it. As the sun sets on the agora, casting long shadows across the stalls, the merchants pack up their goods. They balance their scales one last time, adding a small weight here, taking one away there, until the arm floats perfectly level. Aristotle watches them, nodding. That is the secret. The universe is not a static crystal. It is a scale waiting to be balanced. And as he turns to head home, he leaves behind the impossible dream of the perfect man and offers us something much more useful: the achievable dignity of the balanced life. We leave the personal scale of the golden mean and zoom out, widening our lens to encompass the entire sprawling, chaotic organism of the city-state. Here, the divide between the two men shifts from the ethical to the political, from how a man should live to how a society should survive. The contrast is stark, almost blinding. If you were to walk into Plato's study during these years, you would find him acting as the supreme architect of a dream. He is sketching the blueprints for Callipolis, the beautiful city, a utopia constructed in his dialogue, the Republic. It is a city of perfect geometric order, a crystalline structure designed to never change, never decay, and never kill a Socrates. In Plato's vision, the city is a magnified soul. It has three parts, just like the human interior. At the bottom are the producers, farmers, and craftsmen, driven by appetite. In the middle are the auxiliaries, soldiers, driven by spirit. And at the top, ruling with absolute, unquestioned authority, are the guardians, the philosopher kings. These are not politicians kissing babies and making promises. They are reluctant rulers, dragged from their studies to steer the ship of state because they alone have seen the Sun of Truth. To ensure their purity, Plato proposes a radical, almost terrifying restructuring of human life. For the guardians, there is to be no private property, no private homes, no private families. Wives and children are to be held in common. A child born to a guardian is taken away to a nursery, never to know its biological parents, so that every elder is a father and every peer is a brother. It is a vision of total unity, a society fused into a single body where, as Plato writes, if a finger is hurt, the whole community feels the pain. It is magnificent, austere, and chillingly inhuman. Now, dissolve that image and step into the cluttered, dusty workroom of Aristotle. The air here does not smell of incense and high theory. It smells of dry papyrus and the sweat of travel. Aristotle is not dreaming up a city that doesn't exist. He is doing something that no one had ever bothered to do before. He is collecting the receipts of the cities that do exist. With the help of his students, Aristotle launches a massive research project, arguably the first grand socio-political study in history. They gather, categorize, and analyze the constitutions of 158 real Greek city-states. They study Athens, Sparta, Carthage, Crete, democracies, oligarchies, tyrannies, monarchies. Aristotle doesn't want to know what the perfect government looks like in heaven. He wants to know what makes the government of Thebes collapse, while the government of Sparta endures. He is the mechanic, looking at the wreckage of crashed chariots to see which axle broke. As he combs through this mountain of data, Aristotle finds himself horrified by Plato's dream. He reads the proposal to abolish the family and shakes his head. In the Politics, he delivers a critique that is devastating in its practical wisdom. He argues that Plato's obsession with unity will essentially dilute love until it is meaningless. That which is common to the greatest number, Aristotle writes, has the least care bestowed upon it. He uses the metaphor of a drop of sweet honey mixed into a gallon of water. If you try to make everyone brothers in a massive state, the bond becomes so watery it loses all its sweetness. It is better, he quips with a touch of dry, realistic humor, to be a real cousin to someone than a son in Plato's Republic. He understands a fundamental psychological truth. Humans care most about what is their own. We polish our own sandals. We neglect the communal sandals. To abolish private property and family is not to create harmony. It is to create neglect and resentment. Aristotle's political vision, therefore, is not a crystal tower, but a messy working construction site. He classifies governments not by their holiness, but by their number and their intent. Rule by one is monarchy, good, or tyranny, bad. Rule by the few is aristocracy, good, or oligarchy, bad. Rule by the many is polity, good, or democracy, bad. It is interesting to note that Aristotle, like Plato, was suspicious of democracy, which they both defined as the lawless rule of the mob. But unlike Plato, Aristotle was willing to compromise. He concludes that while a monarchy led by a perfect man might be the best in theory, in reality, it usually turns into a nightmare. Therefore, the best practical hope for a city is a polity, a mixed constitution, dominated by a large, stable middle class. This is Aristotle's golden mean applied to the state. He is the first champion of the middle class. He argues that the rich are too arrogant and the poor are too desperate. The middle class, who have enough to lose but not enough to tyrannize, are the ballast of the ship. They are the ones who follow the law. It is a boring, unsexy conclusion compared to Plato's philosopher kings, but it is a conclusion that has kept civilizations afloat for centuries. Historians still argue over the timeline of these writings, questioning whether Aristotle softened his views as he grew older, or if he always held this pragmatic stance. But the emotional texture of the disagreement is clear. Plato wants to save the world by freezing it in perfection. Aristotle wants to save the world by building guardrails around its imperfections. Imagine the two of them debating this at dinner. Plato pushes away his bowl, his eyes burning with the fire of the ideal. But if we do not aim for the impossible best, we will settle for the corruption we have. Aristotle, finishing his olives, wipes his hands and replies gently, "But master, a law that ignores human nature is not a law. It is a wish. We must build a house for men, not for gods." There is a profound humility in Aristotle's Politics. He admits that there is no one-size-fits-all. A constitution that works for a seafaring trading city like Athens will not work for an agricultural fortress like Sparta. Politics is the art of the possible. It is the science of muddling through. As we look back at the Republic and the politics lying side by side on the table of history, we see the eternal tension of human governance. we need Plato's vision to give us a North Star, a sense of justice to strive for. But we need Aristotle's map to navigate the swamps and mountains on the ground. Plato gave us the genre of utopian literature, from Thomas More to modern sci-fi. Aristotle gave us political science, the study of voting systems, checks and balances, and constitutional law. The sun sets over the city of Athens, a city that was neither Plato's heaven nor a total hell, but a functioning, arguing, living mess. Aristotle watches the assembly disperse, the citizens arguing, laughing, and complaining. He knows it is flawed, he knows it is unstable, but he also knows it is real. And for the student who broke the master's world, reality is the only place worth living. He turns back to his scrolls, dipping his pen to record one more messy, imperfect fact, believing that in the accumulation of these small truths, a different kind of wisdom, a human wisdom, is slowly being built. The year is 347 BC. The spring rains have passed, leaving the Attic plain washed clean and vibrant. But inside the walls of the academy, the air is thick with a heavy, muffled silence. The inevitable moment, the one that every student has dreaded for a decade, has finally arrived. Plato is dying. He is 80 years old, or perhaps 81. A colossal age in a time when a simple infection could kill a king in his prime. The end does not come with the dramatic tragedy of Socrates, drinking poison in a prison cell while arguing for his life. It comes with the quiet, fading grace of a long twilight. The legends of his death vary, and historians still sift through them, looking for the kernel of truth. Some say he died peacefully in his sleep, the pen literally dropping from his hand as he revised the laws, his final sprawling work. Others, preferring a more poetic exit, claim he died at a wedding feast, lulled to sleep by the sound of a Thracian girl playing the flute, drifting away from the noise of the celebration into the ultimate silence. Whatever the specific hour, the impact is seismic. When the news ripples out from the house of the master, it is as if the central pillar of the intellectual world has cracked. For 30 years, Plato was philosophy. He was the sun that allowed everyone else to see. Even his critics defined themselves by their distance from him. Without him, the academy feels suddenly fragile, a collection of men standing in a garden, wondering if the magic has departed with the magician. Aristotle is there. He is 37 years old now, a man in the full maturity of his powers, no longer the foal, but a stallion in his own right. Yet the death of the master shakes him to his core. We must imagine the complexity of his grief. This was the man who took him in as an orphan, who gave him a home, a language, and a purpose. The disagreements over the forms or the nature of the soul fade into the background now. All that remains is the memory of the voice, that sharp, ironic, boundless voice that had challenged him to be better than he was. There is a touching historical fragment, a short elegy attributed to Aristotle, which he supposedly inscribed on an altar dedicated to friendship. In it, he speaks of a man whom it is not lawful for bad men even to praise, a man who, alone or first of mortals, clearly revealed how a man becomes good and happy at the same time. It is a stunning admission. Even after dismantling Plato's metaphysics, Aristotle bows his head before Plato's character. He acknowledges that Plato was the first to show that virtue and happiness are the same path. The student may have rejected the teacher's map, but he never stopped admiring the traveler. The funeral is a solemn affair, conducted on the grounds of the academy. The body is likely washed and anointed by the women of his family, then laid out on a bier. The students, hundreds of them, from the inner circle to the distant admirers, form a procession. They bury him not in a distant cemetery, but right there, in the garden he created, amidst the olive trees that he believed were sacred to Athena. He becomes part of the soil of the school. For Aristotle, standing by the fresh earth, this is a moment of profound dislocation. He has spent more time with Plato than he spent with his own father. He has spent more time in the academy than in his home city of Stagira. He is a foreigner in Athens, a metic without citizenship rights. His only true citizenship has been his membership in this intellectual family. Now, the patriarch is gone. The mood in the days following the burial is strange. The friends of the forms are suddenly a family without a father. The debates are quieter. The students glance at the empty seat in the exedra, the stone worn smooth by 50 years of sitting. There is a sense of a vacuum, a terrifying open space. Who will lead? Who has the strength to hold the reins of this chariot? It is in this shadow that the old tensions begin to sharpen again. While Plato was alive, his sheer presence was enough to hold the contradictions together. He was the bridge between the mystics and the scientists, the mathematicians and the naturalists. But with the bridge gone, the two sides of the academy begin to drift apart. The overarching sky has vanished, and now everyone is looking at the ground, marking out their territories. Aristotle retreats to his quarters, perhaps to his library. He pulls down a scroll of Plato's Phaedo, the dialogue about the death of Socrates. He reads the arguments for the immortality of the soul. He still doesn't agree with them. He still thinks the soul is the form of the body, destined to fade like the impression in the wax. But perhaps, on this specific night, he allows himself to hope that he is wrong. He looks out the window at the stars, the divine bodies that move in perfect circles. He wonders if the master is out there, finally seeing the forms face to face, finally understanding the geometry of the good. The era of the student and the master is over. The bond is broken by the only force stronger than logic, death. But as the mourning clothes are folded away and the life of the school resumes, a new question rises like a cold wind from the north. The academy belongs to the dead master, but who does the future belong to? The reader is ready to lead, but the politics of succession are rarely about merit alone. Aristotle blows out his lamp, sitting in the darkness of a world that suddenly feels very large, very lonely, and very much up for grabs. The funeral garlands have withered, and the earth on the master's grave has settled. But the air in the academy remains charged with a static electricity that makes the skin prickle. We are entering one of the most intriguing moments of ancient academic politics, a moment where the high ideals of philosophy crash headlong into the mundane realities of property law and bloodlines. The question hanging over the olive grove is simple: who inherits the throne? If the academy were a pure meritocracy, a republic of the mind such as Plato had dreamed of, there would be little debate. Aristotle is the colossus. He is the mind, the reader, the man who has already written more, seen more, and categorized more than the rest of the school combined. To the students who value sheer intellectual firepower, he is the natural successor. But Athens is not the republic. It is a city of laws, and under Athenian law, the academy is not a spiritual entity. It is a piece of real estate. It is a plot of land, a gymnasium, and a collection of shrines. And Aristotle, for all his brilliance, has a fatal flaw in the eyes of the city. He is a metic, a resident alien. He is a man from the north, a Stagirite. He cannot legally own land in Athens. He cannot inherit the deed to the garden. And so, the mantle falls not to the genius student, but to the safe, legal heir, Speusippus. He is Plato's nephew, the son of Plato's sister, Platone. Imagine the scene where the decision is finalized. It is likely a quiet, bureaucratic affair, a reading of a will, a nodding of heads among the family members. Speusippus takes the seat of the scholarch. He is not a villain. Historians describe him as a capable, if somewhat sickly, man, deeply committed to the Pythagorean side of Plato's teaching. But he is not Aristotle. Under his leadership, the academy begins to turn inward. If Plato was a poet who loved math, Speusippus is a mathematician who tolerates poetry. He rejects the forms as ideal objects and replaces them with numbers. For him, the secret of the universe is not the good, but the one. The broad, sweeping curiosity of the academy begins to narrow into a corridor of abstract numerology. For Aristotle, this is the signal. The writing is not just on the wall, it is in the very geometry of the new regime. He realizes that the academy, the home he has loved for 20 years, is no longer big enough to hold his questions. He wants to study the biology of mollusks. Speusippus wants to study prime numbers. The divergence is no longer just philosophical, it is institutional. But there is a darker, more dangerous current pushing him out of the city, one that flows from the violent world of politics outside the garden walls. While the philosophers were debating the nature of the soul, the map of Greece was burning. To the north, the kingdom of Macedon, led by the one-eyed warrior king Philip II, has been systematically devouring the free city-states. In 348 BC, the year before Plato died, Philip destroyed the city of Olynthus, leveling it to the ground and selling its people into slavery. Athens is in a panic. The great orator Demosthenes is thundering in the assembly, whipping the crowd into a frenzy against the barbarian Philip. Aristotle is in a perilous position. He is not just a northerner. His father was the personal physician to Philip's father. He has deep ancestral ties to the Macedonian court. As the anti-Macedonian sentiment boils over in the agora, Aristotle begins to feel the cold stares of the Athenians. He is no longer just the eccentric philosopher. He is the Macedonian spy. The city that killed Socrates is looking for a new scapegoat, and Aristotle, prudent and observant as always, has no intention of becoming a martyr. He remembers the hemlock. Historians still debate the primary reason for his departure. Was it the snub by Speusippus, or the fear of persecution? The truth, as it often does, likely lies in the messy intersection of both. He was an intellectual orphan and a political target. The doors were closing. Picture him in his room for the last time. He is packing the library. This is a monumental task. He possesses the largest private collection of scrolls in Athens. He must crate them up, protecting them from the sea air and the damp. He is dismantling the house of the reader. There is a heavy rhythmic melancholy to this packing. 20 years of memories are being rolled up. The lectures, the arguments, the laughter, the long walks under the plane trees. He arrived as a boy of 17. He is leaving as a man of 37. His youth is dissolved into the dust of this city. he does not leave alone. Xenocrates, another senior student, who also found Speusippus's math obsession too narrow, decides to go with him. It is a small comfort, a shred of the old academy breaking off to drift across the sea. The departure is quiet. There is no grand farewell speech in the agora, no dramatic slamming of the gates. They lightly slip away at dawn, heading for the harbor of Piraeus to catch a ship bound for the eastern Aegean. As the ship pulls away, Aristotle stands at the stern, watching the Acropolis shrink against the horizon. The Parthenon glows pink in the morning light, beautiful and indifferent. He is sailing into the unknown. He has no job, no school, no patron. He is a middle-aged philosopher with a boatload of books and a reputation for being difficult. But as the coast of Attica fades into a blue line, a strange sense of freedom begins to fill his chest. The shadow of the master is gone. The constraints of the academy are gone. He is adrift, yes, but he is also released. The world is wide, and it is full of things he has not yet catalogued. He sets his course for Assos, a city on the coast of Asia Minor, ruled by a tyrant named Hermias, who is an old friend and a former student of the academy. He is going from the center of civilization to the edge of the empire, but he carries something with him that is more valuable than the academy's real estate. He carries the method. He carries the relentless, burning desire to see the world as it is. The student has been expelled from the nest, but he has learned how to fly. And as the prow of the ship cuts through the dark, wine-dark sea, heading towards the wild coast of Asia, the second great act of his life, the act of pure discovery, is about to begin. The camera glides now across the Aegean, leaving the marble pillars of Athens far behind, to settle on the rugged, pine-covered island of Lesbos. Specifically, we descend into the quiet, brackish waters of the Gulf of Calone, a massive inland lagoon that cuts deep into the island's heart. It is a place of stillness, where the water is flat as a mirror and the air smells of salt, resin, and drying fish. Here, in this remote aquatic laboratory, the philosopher has reinvented himself. The man who debated the nature of the good in the Exedra is now a man wading knee-deep in the mud, holding a net. This period, known as the Lesbos years, is the happiest and most productive time of Aristotle's life. He is no longer the reader trapped in a library. He is the naturalist unleashed, accompanied by a brilliant young student named Theophrastus, a native of the island who would become the father of botany. Aristotle undertakes a project of staggering ambition. He decides to catalogue the logic of life itself. Imagine him standing on the wooden dock at Pera, the sun beating down on his broad forehead. He is holding a cuttlefish. To a fisherman, this is bait or dinner. To Aristotle, it is a riddle. He dissects it with the precision of a surgeon, marveling at the internal ink sac, the complex eye, the tentacles. He writes down everything. He notes that the octopus has a specific arm used for reproduction, the hectocotylus, which detaches during mating. It is a detail so bizarre and specific that for 2,000 years, biologists thought he was hallucinating or repeating fishermen's tall tales. It wasn't until the mid-19th century that scientists rediscovered this phenomenon and realized that Aristotle had been right all along. He was 22 centuries ahead of the textbooks. He studies the dogfish shark. He notices something incredible. The young crow inside the mother, attached by a cord to a placenta-like structure, similar to mammals. Again, a fact that would be dismissed as fable until modern marine biology confirmed it. He is seeing things that no human eye has ever bothered to focus on. He is discovering that the forms are not just in the sky, they are hiding in the reproductive habits of the sea urchin. But his life here is not just about slime and specimens. It is about the human heart. In Assos, before coming to Lesbos, Aristotle had done something Plato would have found distracting, perhaps even pitiable. He fell in love. He married Pythias, the niece, or perhaps adopted daughter, of his friend Hermias. By all accounts, it was a marriage of deep affection. We see a softer Aristotle here, a man who enjoys the domestic shadows of the cave. He has a wife. He has a daughter. He is living the life of a citizen, a husband, a father. This domestic happiness seeps into his philosophy. It reinforces his belief that the good life is not a solitary ascent to a cold peak, but a life lived in a community with family, friends, and modest wealth. He looks at Pythias and does not see a distraction from the truth. He sees a partner in the search for it. He realizes that the good includes the warmth of a dinner table and the sound of a child's laughter. The lagoon is his sanctuary. It is a world away from the politics of Athens and the wars of kings. Here, the only wars are between the crab and the mollusk. The only laws are the laws of the tides. Aristotle and Theophrastus spend their days walking the hills, categorizing plants, or rowing out onto the glassy water. They are the Adam and Eve of science, naming the animals not by divine fiat, but by careful observation. The sponge, Aristotle notes, seems to be halfway between a plant and an animal. He is seeing the great chain of being, the scala naturae, stretching from the lifeless rock to the divine mind with no breaks in the chain. But history has a way of finding you, even in the middle of a lagoon. It is 343 BC. Aristotle is 41 years old. A ship enters the harbor of Mytilene, bearing the royal seal of Macedon, the sunburst. A messenger steps onto the dock, looking for the son of Nicomachus. He carries a letter from Pella, from the court of King Philip II. The message is short, flattering, and terrifying. Philip, the most powerful man in the world, the man who has crushed the armies of Illyria and Thrace, is looking for a tutor. He has a son, a wild, brilliant, terrifying boy of 13 named Alexander. Philip wants the greatest mind in Greece to tame the greatest spirit in Macedon. He is offering Aristotle a position that is half honor, half hostage. Aristotle stands on the shore, the letter in his hand. He looks at the lagoon, at the peaceful water where the secrets of the cuttlefish sleep. He knows that if he accepts, this idyll is over. He will be trading the silence of biology for the roar of empire. He will be trading the company of Theophrastus for the company of wolves. But he also knows he cannot refuse. The ties of blood, the debt of his father, and perhaps his own curiosity about power pull him north. He packs his specimens. He packs his notes on the dogfish and the bees. He says goodbye to the fisherman who thought he was crazy but liked him anyway. He takes Pythias and his books, and he boards the ship. The biologist is leaving the lab. The philosopher is going to the palace. And the stage is set for the most famous classroom in history, where the man who wanted to understand the world would try to teach the boy who wanted to conquer it. We travel now to the northern edge of the Greek world, leaving the salt-scrubbed simplicity of the lagoon for the damp, verdant forests of Macedonia. Here, in a place called Mieza, nestled in the foothills of Mount Vermion, lies the Nymphaeum, the sanctuary of the nymphs. It is a natural cathedral of caves, dripping stalactites, and lush vines, a place where the air is cool and smells of wet moss and river water. King Philip has converted this shrine into a royal boarding school, a secluded retreat far from the intrigues of the capital at Bella. It is here that the strangest classroom in history assembles. Imagine the scene. On one of the stone benches carved directly into the rock, benches that you can still visit today, moss-covered and silent, sits Aristotle. He is 42, his hair thinning, his eyes sharp and watchful. He has brought his maps, his globes, and his scrolls. Opposite him sits a boy of 13. He is small for his age, but vibrating with a terrifying, restless energy. He has a mane of golden hair that he refuses to cut short in the Athenian style, and his eyes are mismatched, one deep blue, one dark brown, giving him a gaze that seems to look at two worlds at once. This is Alexander. History has romanticized this meeting as a perfect fusion of wisdom and power. But the reality is likely a friction of two incompatible elements. Aristotle is the apostle of the golden mean, the man who believes that virtue lies in moderation, in the balance between extremes. Alexander is a boy who knows no middle ground. He is pure excess. He is the wolf of Macedon, passionate, violent, hungry for glory, and utterly convinced of his own divinity. Aristotle tries to teach him the politics. He explains that a king must be the servant of the law, a guardian of the constitution. He lectures on the difference between a monarch and a tyrant. Alexander listens, his mismatched eyes narrowing, but one suspects he is not hearing a lesson on restraint. He is hearing a lesson on control. When Aristotle talks about the geography of Asia, describing the great rivers and the mountain ranges, Alexander does not take notes on the climate. He takes notes on the logistics. He asks how many days a larger army would need to cross the desert. He asks about the water sources. He is weaponizing the curriculum. There is a fascinating, specific object that symbolizes their relationship. Aristotle, knowing the boy's obsession with Homer, prepares a special, annotated copy of the Iliad for him. He corrects the text, perhaps adding notes on strategy or geography. Alexander treasures this scroll. He will carry it with him across the world, sleeping with it under his pillow alongside a dagger. But here lies the disconnect. Aristotle gives him the book as a work of poetry and moral tragedy, a warning about the rage of Achilles. Alexander reads it as an instruction manual. He does not want to understand Achilles. He wants to be Achilles. He wants the rage. He wants the fire. The lessons at Mieza are not just one-on-one. Alexander is surrounded by his companions, Hephaestion, Ptolemy, Cassander, the sons of Macedonian nobles who will one day carve up the world between them. Aristotle is teaching a classroom of future kings and warlords. He teaches them botany, and they learn which woods make the best spear shafts. He teaches them medicine, and they learn how to treat sword wounds. He teaches them rhetoric, and they learn how to inspire men to die. We can imagine the quiet frustration of the philosopher. He is trying to mold a philosopher king, a rational ruler who will bring Greek order to the chaos of the north. But he is working with a material that refuses to be cooled. Alexander is wild. He tames the unrideable horse, Bucephalus, not by logic, but by noticing its shadow, an observational trick that perhaps he learned from Aristotle. but applied with a physicality the master never possessed. Yet, there is a deep, grudging respect between them. Alexander famously says later, "I owe my life to my father, but I owe the good life to my teacher." Aristotle opens the boy's mind to the vastness of the world. He teaches him that the world is knowable, that it can be mapped, measured, and conquered. He feeds Alexander's hunger for discovery. When Alexander later marches into India, he will send back specimens of exotic animals and plants to his old teacher in Athens, a conqueror paying tribute to a biologist. But in the cool caves of Mieza, there is also a failure. Aristotle fails to teach Alexander the most important lesson of all: moderation. He fails to teach him that a man is not a god. Aristotle believes that Greeks are meant to rule barbarians, a common prejudice of the time, and he urges Alexander to treat the Greeks as friends and the Persians as plants or animals. Alexander will eventually reject this too. He will try to blend the cultures, wearing Persian robes and demanding to be worshipped, horrifying the old philosopher who believes in the distinction between free men and slaves. There is a moment we can visualize near the end of their 3 years together. It is late at night. The fire in the Nymphaeum has burned down to embers. Aristotle is looking at a map of the known world, pointing out the limits of the Mediterranean. Alexander is looking past the edge of the parchment into the blank spaces. Aristotle sees the nothingness where civilization ends. Alexander sees the everything where his legend begins. The teacher points to the ground, to the soil, to the roots. Here is truth, he says, in what is stable. The student points to the horizon. There is truth, he replies, in what is taken. In 340 BC, the lessons end abruptly. King Philip is going to war against Byzantium and leaves the 16-year-old Alexander as regent of Macedon. The boy trades his stylus for a sword. He leads a cavalry charge, crushes a rebellion, and founds his first city, naming it, with zero subtlety, Alexandropolis. Aristotle packs up his maps. His job is done. He has sharpened the blade, polished the steel, and balanced the hilt. But as he watches the young prince ride out of Mieza, surrounded by his laughing, dangerous friends, Aristotle must feel a chill that has nothing to do with the damp cave air. He has unleashed a force he cannot control. The wolf has eaten the philosophy and remained a wolf. The world is about to break, and the man who broke it was the student who sat on his bench, nodding politely, while planning to burn the map. The camera moves from the wild forests of Macedon back to the blue crystalline light of Athens. It is 335 BC. 12 years have passed since Aristotle fled the city, crating up his library and slipping away in the dawn. Now he returns. But he does not return as a refugee or a hesitant student. He returns with the confidence of a man who has tutored kings, dissected the biology of the Aegean, and mapped the constitutions of the world. He is 49 years old, in the prime of his intellectual authority. Athens, however, has changed. The political landscape has been flattened by the Macedonian steamroller. In 338 BC, at the Battle of Chaeronea, Philip and a teenage Alexander annihilated the combined Greek armies. The great era of the independent city-state is effectively over. Athens is now a subject ally of Macedon. This geopolitical shift is crucial because it gives Aristotle a new, albeit dangerous, status. He is no longer just a metic from the north. He is the friend of the conquerors. He has a powerful protection. The anti-Macedonian politicians who might have harassed him now have to bite their tongues. Imagine him walking through the Dipylon gate again. The city is still noisy, still vibrant, but there is a sullen quietness in the assembly. Aristotle does not go to the academy. The academy is still there, run by Xenocrates now, Speusippus having died of a lingering illness. But it is not his home anymore. It is a place of memory, not future. Aristotle needs his own ground. He needs a space that reflects his new philosophy, open, empirical, connected to the earth. He finds it just outside the city walls to the east, in a grove dedicated to Apollo Lykios, Apollo, the wolf god. It is a public gymnasium, a place where young men have exercised and wrestled for generations. It is called the Lyceum. Unlike the academy, which was a private, secluded garden, the Lyceum is a public park. It has a wrestling ground, a temple, and most importantly, covered walkways called peripatoi. Here, Aristotle plants his flag. He does not buy the land. As a metic, he still cannot own property. But he rents buildings, or perhaps sets up in the public structures. This lack of ownership is symbolic. His school is not a fortress. It is a camp. It is open to the world. The return is a moment of immense psychological satisfaction. He has spent years in the wilderness, literally and metaphorically, gathering his data. Now he is ready to unload the cargo. He opens his crates. Out come the maps of the Nile. Out come the dried specimens of plants from Lesbos. Out come the scrolls of the 158 constitutions. He is setting up the first research institute in history. We can picture the contrast. At the academy, the students are likely sitting in a circle, discussing the mystical properties of the number 3. At the Lyceum, Aristotle is hanging a map on the wall. He is setting up a dissection table. He is organizing a library that is not just for reading, but for reference. He is creating a system where knowledge is not a secret to be guarded, but a resource to be used. There is a wonderful energy to this new beginning. Aristotle is now the master of those who know. He is surrounded by a new generation of students. Theophrastus is there, faithful as ever, along with Eudemus and Aristoxenus. They are not disciples of a guru. They are research assistants. They are colleagues. Aristotle walks the grounds of the Lyceum, testing the acoustics of the colonnades. He feels the gravel under his feet. He smells the sweat of the wrestlers nearby, a reminder that the mind and body are neighbors. He is home, but he has built a new house. He is no longer the student who broke the master's world. He is the master of a new world, a world where the truth is found in the cataloguing of a beetle's legs as much as in the logic of a syllogism. The sun shines on the temple of the wolf god. The wolf of Macedon is out conquering Asia, burning cities and cutting knots. But here in the shadow of the wolf god, the philosopher begins the quiet, steady work of conquering ignorance. He picks up a scroll, gathers his students, and begins to walk. The peripatetic school is open for business. Walk through the gate of the Lyceum. Now, the first thing that hits you is not the scent of incense or the hush of holy silence, but the smell of olive oil and honest sweat. This is not a cloister. It is a gymnasium. To understand the revolution of Aristotle's new school, we must understand the ground it was built on. The academy was a private garden, a retreat for the initiated, a place where the soul tried to escape the body. The Lyceum is a public training ground where the body is celebrated, oiled, and wrestled to perfection. Here, amidst the thud of heavy leather balls, the slap of skin on skin from the wrestling pit, and the rhythmic breathing of runners, Aristotle sets up his cathedral of logic. It is a deliberate, provocative choice. He is planting his philosophy right in the middle of physical life. He is saying, effectively, that the mind is not an enemy of the body, but its captain. The architecture of the Lyceum reflects this openness. It is dominated by the peripatos, a covered colonnade or walkway that provides shade from the fierce Attic sun. But unlike the Academy's shrines, the walls here are not bare. Imagine walking down the colonnade and seeing something that had never been seen in Athens before: maps. Aristotle and his students have created large-scale maps of the known world, pinning them up for study. There are diagrams of anatomical dissections, perhaps a sketch of the dogfish's internal organs or the complex stomach of a ruminant. There are shelves, actual shelves, stacked with rocks, dried plants, and preserved bones. This is the birth of the museum. The word museion originally meant a temple to the muses, the goddesses of inspiration. But Aristotle changes the definition. He turns the temple into a collection. He believes that the muses are not just served by singing hymns. They are served by counting petals. The Lyceum is a warehouse of reality. While Platonists are trying to purify their minds of earthly debris, Aristotelians are hoarding it. They are the great collectors. They collect proverbs. They collect winners of the Pythian games. They collect theatre scripts. They collect constitutions. The atmosphere is less like a church and more like a bustling newsroom or a busy laboratory. Students are running in with new data. Master, the fishermen in the harbor say the tuna are migrating early this year. Master, a traveler from Persia says the elephants use their noses as hands. Aristotle stands in the center of this whirlwind, not as a guru, but as an editor-in-chief. He filters, he questions, he categorizes. He is building the world's first database. There is a rhythm to the day here that divides the school into two distinct moods. In the mornings, the morning walk, Aristotle lectures to his advanced students. This is the acroamatic teaching, the hard stuff. Logic, physics, metaphysics. These are the lectures where the air is thick with technical terms, where they invent the vocabulary of science we still use today: matter, form, energy, potential, substance, accident. They are forging language like blacksmiths, hitting red-hot iron, creating words to hold concepts that didn't exist an hour ago. But in the evenings, the mood softens. This is the exoteric time, the outside teachings. The gates are thrown open to the public. The citizens of Athens, the shopkeepers, the politicians, the curious, can come and listen to Aristotle speak on rhetoric or politics, or how to manage a household. This is a radical act of generosity. Plato often treated the public with a mix of pity and disdain, viewing them as prisoners in the cave who were too stupid to turn around. Aristotle views them as rational creatures who just need a little guidance. He teaches them how to speak well, how to argue logically, how to understand the tragedies they watch in the theater. He democratizes wisdom. We can imagine the visual contrast between the two schools. If the academy was a circle, everyone facing the center, looking at the one, the Lyceum is a line. It is a timeline of history. It is a line of classification. It is a procession of facts. The students here are not trying to become good in the abstract. They are trying to become smart in the specific. There is also a warmth here, a camaraderie born of shared labor. Theophrastus is here, the loyal lieutenant, now managing the botanical gardens. He is growing exotic plants sent from Alexander's conquests in the east. Pepper plants, cinnamon, strange roots that have no Greek names yet. Aristoxenus is here, arguing that music is mathematical but also emotional, challenging the Pythagorean view that music is only numbers. They are a team. They dine together, but unlike the austere meals of the academy, one suspects the dinner conversation at the Lyceum is filled with trivia, debates about the mating habits of hedgehogs, and the latest news from the war in Asia. Soft humor likely permeates the air. We can picture Aristotle, the man who wrote the Logic, watching a wrestling match in the gymnasium and pointing out to his students the physics of the takedown, the fulcrum, the lever, the center of gravity. He cannot help himself. He sees the laws of nature everywhere. When a student trips over a stone, Plato would say the student was distracted by the illusion of the material world. Aristotle would say the student failed to observe the particular location of the stone relative to his foot. The Lyceum also introduces a new tool to the philosopher's arsenal: the library. Aristotle is the first man in Europe to organize a library systematically. He teaches his students that before you think, you must read what others have thought. Let us see what the wise men of old have said, he often begins. He does not dismiss the past. He stands on it. This reverence for what has been said, endoxa, creates a sense of continuity. He is not trying to invent the world from scratch every morning. He is building a second story on the house of human knowledge. As the sun sets over the gymnasium, the wrestlers pack up their oil flasks and scrapers. The evening lectures conclude, and the citizens wander back to the city, their heads full of new ideas about tragedy or persuasion. The Lyceum quiets down, but it never feels empty. It is populated by the thousands of specimens, the scrolls, the maps. It is a heavy, dense place, anchored to the earth by the sheer weight of its contents. Aristotle walks the colonnade one last time, checking the locks on the library. He is the guardian of the facts. He knows that the wolf god Apollo is also the god of light, not just the mystical light of revelation, but the clear, sharp light of the morning sun that allows you to see the veins in a leaf. He has built a place where that light can shine on everything, from the highest star to the lowest worm. The academy was a dream of what the world should be. The Lyceum is the encyclopedic celebration of what the world is. And as the night watchman arrives to guard the gymnasium, Aristotle heads home to Pythias, his mind likely already turning to the next task: the categorization of the soul itself. Listen closely now. If you were to press your ear against the limestone columns of the Lyceum in the quiet of the morning, you would hear a sound that defines this new era of thought. It is not the scratching of a stylus, nor the chanting of a hymn. It is the rhythmic, steady crunch of gravel under sandals. Crunch, crunch, crunch. This is the heartbeat of the peripatetic school. The name itself, peripatetic, comes from the Greek word peripatos, meaning a colonnade or a covered walkway. But it also implies the act of walking about. And here in the long shadowed corridors that border the gymnasium, philosophy has ceased to be a sedentary act. It has become kinetic. In the academy, the students sat. They sat in circles, they sat on benches, they sat in the dust. The posture of Platonism was static, a stillness designed to let the mind detach from the body and float upward. But Aristotle, the biologist who tracks the migration of fish and the motion of the stars, knows that life is movement, kinesis. He understands that the brain is not a detached cloud. It is an organ fed by blood, and blood moves better when the legs are moving, so he teaches on his feet. Imagine the scene at dawn. The morning light is cutting through the pillars in sharp, angular beams. Aristotle sets a brisk pace. He is not meandering aimlessly. He is walking with purpose, his robe swaying with the rhythm of his stride. A cluster of his best students, Theophrastus, Eudemus, and the others, flock around him like birds in a slipstream. They are not just listening. They are keeping up. To learn from Aristotle, you must literally follow him. You must have the stamina for the truth. There is a wonderful, grounded logic to this method. When you walk, you cannot ignore the world. You have to navigate the turns. You have to step over the beetle. You have to adjust to the changing light. The environment becomes a participant in the dialogue. If Aristotle is explaining the nature of time, which he famously defines as the measurement of change, he can point to the shifting shadow of the column and say, "Look, there it is. Time is not a static container. It is that movement right there." The lesson is reinforced by the very act of moving through space. Historians and philologists still argue over the literalness of this tradition. Did they always walk? Some scholars suggest the name peripatetic simply referred to the building, not the activity, and that they likely sat down for the dense technical lectures on logic. It is hard to imagine taking notes on complex syllogisms while power walking. But the image of the walking philosopher has stuck for a reason. It captures the restless energy of Aristotle's mind. He is a predator of facts, stalking the truth. He is not waiting for the truth to come to him. He is hunting it down. Let us visualize the man himself in these moments. We are told by ancient biographers, who may have been gossiping, but whose details add a delicious flavor to the portrait, that Aristotle was a man of distinct style. He was not the stereotypical, unwashed, barefoot sage in rags. He was a bit of a dandy. He supposedly wore rings on his fingers, kept his hair fashionably short, a Macedonian cut, and wore high-quality sandals. There is a soft, humanizing humor in this. Imagine the great genius of the Western world fussing over his jewelry before heading out to explain the structure of the cosmos. It suggests a man who enjoyed the textures of life, who didn't see why being wise meant being uncomfortable. As the group walks, the conversation flows with the rhythm of their steps. This is the morning walk, the acroamatic session, reserved for the initiated. The topics here are difficult, dense, and dangerous. They discuss the unmoved mover, the ultimate cause of the universe. Aristotle argues that there must be something that started all this motion, something that pushes the first domino without being pushed itself. He looks at the sky, then at his moving feet. Everything that moves is moved by something else. The stone is kicked by the foot is moved by the desire is moved by the object. But where does it end? There must be a God who is pure thought, thinking about itself, pulling the universe toward it like a magnet. This God of the Lyceum is very different from the gods of Olympus. He does not throw thunderbolts. He does not rape swans. He does not care about the outcome of the Trojan War. He is pure, cold, beautiful energy. He is the ultimate destination of the walk. In the evening, the pace changes, the shadows lengthen, and the air cools. This is the evening walk, open to the public. The crowd is larger, slower, more diverse. Aristotle slows his stride. He adapts his voice. He is no longer the rigorous logician. He is the wise uncle of the city. He talks about rhetoric, the art of persuasion. He tells them that to convince a man, you must understand his emotions. You must know what makes him angry, what makes him pity, what makes him laugh. He analyzes anger not as a sin, but as a mechanism. Anger is a desire for revenge, accompanied by pain. He dissects human feelings as if they were specimens on a tray. The walking method also changes the dynamic of the student-teacher relationship. When you sit across from a teacher, it is a confrontation, eye to eye. When you walk beside a teacher, it is a partnership. You are both looking ahead at the same path. You are shoulder to shoulder. It creates a sense of shared discovery. Aristotle is not handing down tablets from a mountain. He is pointing out landmarks on a journey they are taking together. We can imagine the sound of their voices drifting through the olive trees, the sharp lisping voice of the master, the breathless questions of the students. But surely, Aristotle, if the soul is the form of the body, keep up, Eudemus, keep up. Look at that bird. How does it fly? What is the efficient cause of the wing? This peripatetic rhythm seeps into the writing itself. If you read Aristotle, it does not flow like the smooth, polished dialogues of Plato. It is choppy, dense, terse. It reads like lecture notes hastily scribbled after a long hike. It has the energy of a man who is trying to get the thought down before it flies away. It is walking prose, functional, muscular, moving from point A to point B without stopping to admire the scenery. As the sun sets, the walking stops. The dust settles on the path. The students rub their tired legs, their minds buzzing with the endorphins of exercise and insight. They have covered miles of ground, both physical and intellectual. They have walked through the classification of mollusks, hiked over the definition of virtue, and sprinted through the logic of the syllogism. Aristotle leans against a pillar, adjusting his rings, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He has proved his point. The mind is not a statue, it is a runner. And to understand the moving world, you must be willing to move with it. The academy was a place to stop and look up. The Lyceum is a place to keep moving and look around. And as the stars come out, the great walker finally stands still, knowing that while his feet stop, the great machinery of the universe, the celestial spheres he studies with such awe, continues its eternal silent rotation overhead. Step now from the sunlit colonnade into the cool, quiet interior of the Lyceum's main hall. The air here is different, still, dry, and heavy, with the scent of cedar dust and drying ink. We are entering the engine room of the Aristotelian machine. Outside, the students are collecting plants and observing politics. But inside, they are doing something arguably more revolutionary. They are building the shelves that will hold all that knowledge together. We are witnessing the birth of logic, the moment when the human mind decided to stop telling stories and start organizing facts. To understand the magnitude of this shift, we must remember the world Aristotle inherited. Before him, wisdom was largely poetic. If you asked a pre-Socratic thinker why the seasons changed, he might tell you a story about Persephone being dragged into the underworld. If you asked Plato what justice was, he might weave a myth about a ring of invisibility or a chariot race in the sky. These stories were beautiful, deep, and emotionally resonant. But to Aristotle, they were messy, they were slippery. You couldn't build a foundation on them because a metaphor can mean two different things to two different people. Aristotle wants to scrape the poetry off the face of the truth to see the bone beneath. He sits at his desk, surrounded by piles of data, and he realizes that before we can argue about what is true, we must agree on how to argue. We need a tool. The Greek word for tool is organon, and that is the name history has given to his collection of logical works. Imagine him holding a stylus, staring at a blank wax tablet. He is about to invent the rules of thinking. He begins with the categories. He argues that everything in the universe can be classified. You can look at an object, say a horse, and ask 10 specific questions. What is it? Substance. How big is it? Quantity. What color is it? Quality. Where is it? Place. When is it? Time. By creating these buckets, Aristotle turns the chaotic flood of reality into a tidy filing system. He is the first librarian of the universe. He tells us that we cannot just say, that thing over there. We must define it. Is it a primary substance? This specific horse, Bucephalus. Or a secondary substance, the species of horse? This sounds dry to modern ears, but in the 4th century BC, it was like discovering a superpower. It gave men the power to cut through confusion. It meant that when two men argued, they could stop and say, wait, are we arguing about the substance of the tax or the quantity of the tax? It brought a devastating clarity to the muddy waters of Athenian debate. Then, he builds the ultimate weapon of reason, the syllogism. This is the 3-step dance of logic that effectively ends an argument before it begins. The structure is simple, rigid, and unbreakable. Premise 1. All men are mortal. Premise 2. Socrates is a man. Conclusion. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. It is a machine. If you feed the right ingredients in at the top, the truth falls out at the bottom, inevitable and pure. You don't need a myth. You don't need a divine revelation. You just need the structure. Aristotle teaches his students that validity is a shape. If the argument has the right shape, the conclusion must follow. This is the birth of the computer code, 2,000 years before the computer. It is the if this, then that logic that runs our world today. There is a distinct lack of romance in this room. The shadows of the cave are gone. The charioteer has landed. In their place is a taxonomy. Aristotle looks at the world and sees a hierarchy of genus and species. He groups animals with blood and animals without blood. He groups governments. He groups virtues. He is writing the first encyclopedia. While Plato wrote dialogues that felt like theater, Aristotle writes treatises that feel like lecture notes, dense, bullet-pointed, efficient. Scholars often note a tragic irony here. The Aristotle we read today is not the literary Aristotle. We know he wrote beautiful dialogues in his youth. Cicero once described Aristotle's prose as a river of gold. But those polished works are lost, burned in the fires of history. What survives are the acroamatic texts, the lecture notes, intended only for the students in the Lyceum. They are dry, difficult, and repetitive. We are judging the greatest writer of antiquity by his rough drafts. It is as if we lost all of Shakespeare's plays and were left only with his grocery lists and stage directions. And yet, even in these rough notes, the brilliance is blinding. The emotional tone of the Lyceum during this phase is one of intense, almost neurotic safety. The world outside is chaotic. Alexander is dying in Babylon. Athens is restless. The gods are silent. But inside the logic, everything is safe. A is A. A thing cannot be both itself and not itself at the same time. The law of non-contradiction. This is Aristotle's security blanket. He builds a wall of logic against the terror of the unknown. He is telling his students, the world is not magic. It is consistent. If you understand the rules, you can understand the game. There is a subtle humor in visualizing the students trying to apply this rigorous logic to their daily lives. We can imagine a young student trying to use a syllogism to decide what to eat for lunch, or Theophrastus gently teasing the master that not every conversation needs to be broken down into premises and conclusions. Aristotle, he might say, the sunset is not a quality of the atmosphere, it is just beautiful. And Aristotle, perhaps smiling, would reply, it is beautiful because of the quality of the atmosphere. But the rift with the past is now absolute. Plato looked at a myth, like the story of Narcissus, and saw a deep spiritual truth about the danger of self-love. Aristotle looks at the story and asks, is this historically true? Number, is it biologically possible? No. Then let us analyze it as a rhetorical device. He categorizes the poets too. In his Poetics, he dissects tragedy not as a religious ritual, but as a machine for producing emotion. He explains exactly how the gears of pity and fear turn to create catharsis. He is the mechanic of the soul. As the scroll is rolled up and placed in its cubbyhole, one of thousands now lining the walls, we feel the immense weight of this achievement. Aristotle has given civilization a spine. He has given us the scientific method, the taxonomy of biology, the rules of logic, and the vocabulary of philosophy. He has moved the human mind from the age of once upon a time to the age of therefore. The hall darkens. The students file out, their heads clear, their arguments sharpened. They are no longer just thinkers. They are logicians. They are armed. And as Aristotle blows out the lamp, the scent of ink lingers, the smell of a world that has been captured, labeled, and put in its proper place. The chaos of the myths has been tamed, but in the silence of the orderly room, one might wonder if something wild and essential has been locked out in the night. We zoom out now to view the map of Athens from above, seeing the city not as a unified center of wisdom, but as a battlefield divided by a silent, invisible trench. On the northwest side, amidst the olive groves, stands the academy, now led by the ascetic Xenocrates. On the eastern side, bustling with the energy of the gymnasium, stands the Lyceum, led by Aristotle. The physical distance between them is short. A vigorous walker could cover it in less than an hour. But the intellectual distance has become an ocean. The polite disagreements of the early years have hardened into a structural fracture that will define the Western mind for the next 2 millennia. The school of Athens is no longer a harmony, it is a duel. The rift is foundational. It comes down to a single, terrifying question. What is real? If you were to walk into the academy in this era, you would find the students obsessed with the universal. They are looking for the capital M man, the capital H horse, the capital J justice. They believe that the specific things you see, Socrates, Bucephalus, a court verdict, are just temporary, degrading snapshots of the eternal truth. To be a Platonist is to believe that the noun is more real than the object it names. If you cross the city to the Lyceum, you enter the cult of the particular. Aristotle is teaching his students the concept of ousia, or substance, and here he drops the hammer. He argues that primary substance is not the abstract idea, it is the individual thing. This man, this horse, this stone, the form of a horse is just a secondary category, a label we use to group the real things together. For Aristotle, if you wiped out every individual horse on earth, the form of horse would cease to exist. It has no independent life. It lives only in the flesh and bone of the animal. This is a direct assault on the Academy's religion. Aristotle is calling their gods empty words and poetic metaphors. In his Metaphysics, he writes with a scorching clarity, to see that the forms are patterns and that other things participate in them is to use empty phrases and poetical metaphors. You can feel the heat in that sentence. He is accusing his old friends not just of being wrong, but of being lazy, of using poetry where they should be using logic. The debate spills out into the streets. We can imagine the students of the two schools passing each other in the agora. The academics, perhaps pale from fasting and indoor geometry, look down on the peripatetics as dirt grubbers and materialists who are obsessed with bugs and guts. The peripatetics, tanned from their walks and field trips, look at the academics as dreamers and mystics who have lost touch with reality. It is the ancient version of the rivalry between the arts and the sciences, or between theology and engineering. Yet, there is a profound irony here. As the rift widens, Aristotle becomes more obsessed with the very thing he rejects, the divine. He realizes that his mechanical universe of pushing and pulling needs a source. If everything is moved by something else, the chain cannot go back forever. There must be a stopper. There must be an unmoved mover. But notice the difference. Plato's God, the good, is a moral magnet. It is something you love, something that makes you want to be better. Aristotle's God is a logical necessity. It is a battery that powers the machine. It thinks only of itself, for it is the most perfect thing, and to think of anything imperfect, like humans, would be a downgrade. Aristotle's God does not love us. He does not know we exist. He is the cold, beautiful engine of eternity. This widens the gap even further. The Academy offers a religion, the Lyceum offers a physics, Plato offers a path to salvation, Aristotle offers a theory of everything. Historians often wonder if the two leaders communicated during these years. Did they send scrolls back and forth? Did they meet for civil dinners? There is no record of it. It seems they settled into a cold war of silence. Xenocrates, a man so austere he supposedly refused to kill a sparrow that flew into his chest, doubled down on the mystical math of Plato. Aristotle, surrounding himself with maps and skeletons, doubled down on the empirical data. The tragedy of this rift is that it forced a choice that perhaps didn't need to be made. Platonism became associated with the spirit, the soul, and the afterlife. Aristotelianism became associated with the body, the earth, and the here and now. The integration that young Aristotle had perhaps hoped for, a philosophy that honored both the sky and the mud, was tearing apart. Imagine Aristotle sitting in the Lyceum library late at night. He is reading a fresh copy of a text from the Academy. He sees them twisting Plato's words into a rigid dogma of numbers. He shakes his head. He loves Plato. but he hates what Platonism is becoming. He feels the burden of being the one to cut the cord. He writes a line that feels like a sigh. We must follow the argument wherever it leads. He is alone in his correctness. He has built a fortress of logic that is impregnable, but it is also isolated. He has saved the phenomena, the appearances of the world, but he has lost the noumena, the spirit behind them. The rift is now a canyon. On one side, the chanters of hymns. On the other, the dissectors of frogs. And standing on the edge of the cliff, looking across at the school that raised him, Aristotle realizes that to save the truth, he has had to exile himself from the only family he ever really understood. The separation is complete. The Western mind has officially split into two hemispheres, and we have been living in the gap between them ever since. Far beyond the quiet, sunlit colonnades of the Lyceum, the world is being reshaped by fire and sword. While Aristotle categorizes the legs of insects and the logic of sentences, his former student is tearing the map of civilization to shreds. Alexander is no longer the boy who sat on the stone bench in Mieza. He is the Lord of Asia, the Pharaoh of Egypt, the King of Kings. He has marched his armies across the Hellespont, crushed the Persian Empire at Gaugamela, and pushed deep into the Hindu Kush. He is a comet burning across the sky, and Aristotle, watching from the distance of Athens, stands in the lengthening shadow of that terrible light. The relationship between the philosopher and the king has devolved into a tragedy of silence and estrangement. In the early years of the campaign, there was a steady flow of letters and gifts. Alexander sent biological specimens, strange pelts, exotic roots, reports of tides in the Indian Ocean, feeding Aristotle's hunger for data. It was the conqueror paying tribute to the scientist. But as the army moved further east, the tone changed. Alexander began to change. He started wearing the purple robes of the Persian kings he had defeated. He began to demand proskynesis, the ritual act of bowing to the ground, from his Greek companions. To a Greek, and especially to an Aristotelian, this was an abomination. You bow to the gods, you shake hands with men. To bow to a man was to confuse the categories of being. The tension snaps with the fate of Callisthenes. Callisthenes was Aristotle's great-nephew, a historian whom Aristotle had recommended to join the expedition to chronicle Alexander's deeds. He was a man of the Lyceum, stubborn, logical, and deeply proud of his Greek heritage. When Alexander demanded that his court bow before him as a living god, Callisthenes refused. He argued, using the very logic Aristotle had taught him, that a man is not a god. The result was horrific. Alexander, drunk on power and paranoia, accused Callisthenes of treason. The historian was thrown into a cage, dragged around with the army, and eventually tortured to death or allowed to die of disease. The accounts vary, but the brutality does not. When the news reaches Athens, it breaks something in Aristotle. The wolf he had tried to tame has eaten his own kin. Aristotle is reported to have said, with a biting, tragic coldness, that Callisthenes was a man of great eloquence, but no common sense. It is a harsh eulogy, but it masks a deep, terrifying realization. Philosophy has failed. The golden mean has no place in a world ruled by a man who thinks he is Zeus. Now, the position of the Lyceum becomes incredibly dangerous. For 12 years, Aristotle has operated under the implicit protection of the Macedonian Empire. The anti-Macedonian politicians in Athens, led by the fiery orator Demosthenes, have hated him but feared to touch him. He is the friend of the tyrant. But now he is the friend of a tyrant who hates him. He is isolated. To the Athenians, he is a Macedonian spy. To Alexander, he is a judgmental old critic. The atmosphere in Athens in the year 323 BC is suffocating. It is a hot summer, heavy with humidity and rumor. Strangers arrive at the Piraeus with wild stories. They say the king is sick in Babylon. They say he drank a bowl of unmixed wine and collapsed. They say he is dead. At first, the Athenian generals refuse to believe it. The orator Demoides famously quips, "If Alexander were dead, the whole world would smell of his corpse." But the smell soon arrives. In June 323 BC, the confirmation comes. Alexander the Great, the student who broke the world, is dead at the age of 32. The reaction in Athens is instantaneous and nuclear. The lid blows off the pressure cooker. The Lomian War begins, a rebellion of the Greek city-states to throw off the Macedonian yoke. The streets of Athens, once quiet with the fear of the empire, are suddenly filled with mobs chanting for freedom and vengeance. Statues of Macedonian officials are toppled, and eyes turn to the Lyceum. Aristotle is 61 years old. He stands in the library, listening to the roar of the city outside. He knows exactly what this sound means. He heard it 39 years ago, when the jury voted to kill Socrates. He knows that a mob does not look for nuance, it looks for blood. A hierophant, a high priest, named Eurymedon, files a formal charge of impiety against him. It is the standard legal weapon used to destroy philosophers. The charge is absurd. They accuse him of writing a hymn to his late friend Hermias that was too prayer-like, implying he treated a mortal as a god. It is a technicality, a pretext for a political lynching. The irony is bitter. Aristotle is being accused of worshipping a man as a god by the very city that hated him for refusing to worship Alexander as a god. He is trapped between the memory of the king and the wrath of the democracy. He looks at his students. Theophrastus is there, terrified. The maps are on the walls. The specimens are in the jars. The work of a lifetime is all around him. But Aristotle is not Socrates. Socrates chose to stay and die to prove a point about the laws. Aristotle is a pragmatist. He believes that the purpose of life is eudaimonia, flourishing, and you cannot flourish if you are dead. He has no desire to be a martyr for a city that has never truly accepted him. He makes a decision that is devoid of high drama, but full of quiet, cutting wisdom. He will not debate the jury. He will not give a speech in the agora. He will simply leave. Legend attributes to him a final parting shot as he prepares to flee, a line that serves as the ultimate callback to the trauma that started it all. He reportedly says, "I will not allow the Athenians to sin twice against philosophy." It is a devastating indictment. The first sin was the murder of Socrates. Aristotle refuses to be the second. He packs quickly. He leaves the library, the Lyceum, and the school in the hands of Theophrastus. He does not take the books. He takes only his family and his immediate servants. Under the cover of darkness, or perhaps in the chaotic confusion of the rebellion, the old master slips out of the Dipylon gate one last time. He walks away from the school he built, away from the city of Plato, away from the center of the world. He heads north to the island of Euboea, to the city of Chalcis, where his mother had family estates. He leaves behind a vacuum. The Lyceum will survive, Theophrastus will guide it brilliantly for decades, but the era of the giants is over. The conqueror is dead in Babylon. The philosopher is a refugee in Chalcis. The shadow has swallowed them both, and as the ship carries him across the narrow strait of Euripus, watching the turbulent, unpredictable tides that rush between the island and the mainland, Aristotle must feel the profound instability of all human things. The categories may be fixed, but the lives we live within them are as fluid and dangerous as the water rushing beneath the hull. The ship cuts through the dark, churning waters of the Euripus Strait, the narrow channel separating the island of Euboea from the Greek mainland. This strip of water is legendary for its violence. The current switches direction 7 times a day, a chaotic, swirling hydraulic mystery that has baffled sailors and scientists for centuries. Legend says that Aristotle, in his final year, would become obsessed with this tide, throwing himself into the water in despair because he could not explain its logic. While the legend is a myth, the metaphor is perfect. The man who explained the universe is now drifting on a current he cannot control, exiled by a political tide that turned against him overnight. As the coastline of Attica disappears into the mist behind him, we must pause to consider the profound weight of the choice he has just made. In the history of philosophy, there are 2 great exits. The first is Socrates, the man who stayed. Socrates accepted the hemlock. He sat in his prison cell, arguing that to flee would be to betray the laws of Athens. He turned his death into a sacrificial rite, a martyrdom that sanctified philosophy as a calling worth dying for. His death was a tragedy, but it was a triumphant tragedy. It said, "The truth is more important than life." Aristotle, sitting on the deck of the refugee's boat, wrapped in his cloak against the sea spray, has chosen the opposite path. He has chosen to run. To the romantic mind, this might look like cowardice. Why not stay? Why not argue his case in the Agora? Why not die for the Lyceum, as Socrates died for the truth? But to see it as cowardice is to misunderstand the man. Aristotle is not a tragedian. He is a biologist. He knows that a dead animal cannot study nature. He knows that flourishing, the ultimate goal of human existence, requires a pulse. By fleeing, he is not betraying philosophy. He is practicing it. He is applying the golden mean to his own survival. On one side is the excess of rash martyrdom. On the other is the deficiency of groveling fear. In the middle is the prudent, rational withdrawal to safety. I will not allow the Athenians to sin twice against philosophy. The line echoes in his mind, not as a boast, but as a grim act of mercy toward his enemies. If Athens killed him, they would stain their hands with the blood of the 2 greatest thinkers in history. They would become a city of savages. By leaving, Aristotle saves them from themselves. He denies them the crime. It is a final, subtle act of teaching, a lesson in justice delivered by refusing to be a victim. Yet the pain of the departure is acute. We must visualize what he has left behind. The Lyceum was not just a school. It was the greatest hard drive of the ancient world. He had to leave the maps pinned to the walls. He had to leave the specimens in the jars, the dissected cuttlefish, the pressed flowers from Asia, the geological samples. He had to leave the library. Before slipping away, he had gathered his closest circle, the inner ring of the peripatetics. In a hurried, hushed ceremony, likely by the light of a single lamp in the library, he handed the keys of the school to Theophrastus. This was the passing of the torch. Theophrastus, the gentle botanist from Lesbos, the man who loved flowers as much as Aristotle loved animals, was the only one who could be trusted. Aristotle did not leave the school to a family member. He left it to the most competent mind. He entrusted the thousands of scrolls, the acroamatic lecture notes that contained the entirety of his system, to his friend. "Keep them safe," he might have whispered. "The world will need them." And so the reader leaves his books. It is a spiritual amputation. A scholar without his library is a carpenter without his tools. As the boat approaches the docks of Chalcis, Aristotle is lighter, but it is the lightness of loss. He is returning to the estate of his mother, Phaestus. He is going back to the womb of his family history, a circle closing. Chalcis is not Athens. It is a quiet, provincial merchant city. There is no agora filled with debaters, no theatre of Dionysus, no intellectual electricity. The silence here is heavy. The locals know who he is, the famous tutor of the dead king, but they treat him with a distant, wary respect. He is a celebrity in exile. He settles into the family home. It is a comfortable house, likely with a view of the strait. He has his servants. He has Herbilis, the woman who became his companion after Pythias died. She is loyal, caring for the aging philosopher with the tenderness he notes in his will. But the energy of the bios politikos, the political life, is gone. The man who mapped the constitutions of 158 cities is now a private citizen with a garden wall. His body, too, is beginning to fail. The stomach ailments that have plagued him for years are worsening. The digestion that he analyzed so clinically in his biology texts is now turning against him. He feels the machinery slowing down. The heat of the innate vitality is cooling. But even in exile, the mind does not stop. He walks the shores of the Euripus. He watches the water churn. He writes letters to Antipater, the Macedonian regent, advocating for the safety of Athens, the very city that wants to kill him. He cannot help himself. He is still the statesman, still the observer. He looks at the stars from his balcony in Chalcis, and they are the same stars he saw from the Lyceum, the same stars he saw from the caves of Mieza. They are the only things that haven't changed. The sin twice is avoided. Athens is safe from its crime. But the price is this lonely, quiet sunset on an island, separated from the conversation that has been the blood in his veins for 40 years. He is the man who defined man as a political animal, an animal that lives in a city. Now, he is an animal alone. The wolf has been driven from the pack, not to die in the jaws of the hunters, but to fade away in the silence of the den. And as the tides of the Euripus reverse again, rushing back the way they came, Aristotle prepares for the final reversal, the return of the formed matter to the dust from which it came. The aperture of our story narrows now, closing down from the grand sweep of empires and academies to the intimate, quiet radius of a single room in a house by the sea. It is the autumn of 322 BC. Aristotle is 62 years old, an age that the Greeks considered the threshold of deep elderhood. He is in Chalcis, on the long island of Euboea, living in the estate inherited from his mother. The frantic noise of the Athenian mob is gone. The marching boots of Alexander's armies are gone. All that remains is the sound of water, the relentless, confusing rushing of the Euripus Strait just outside his window. This strait is a geographical anomaly, a place where the sea behaves with a kind of madness. The currents reversing direction multiple times a day with a violence that defies the simple logic of the tides. There is a persistent medieval legend that claims Aristotle, unable to solve the riddle of this water, threw himself into the current in a final act of intellectual despair, crying out, "Since Aristotle cannot capture the Euripus, let the Euripus capture Aristotle." It is a dramatic story, but it is a lie. Aristotle does not die of frustration, he dies of biology. The stomach ailment that has shadowed him for years has finally breached the defenses of his constitution. The master of those who know is dying the most ordinary human death imaginable, his body simply wearing out. But in this final year of silence, there is a profound beauty. Stripped of his school, his library, and his public status, Aristotle turns his gaze to the smallest, most tender duties of a private man. We have preserved for us, by a miracle of history, the text of his last will and testament. It is not a document of metaphysical grandstanding. It is a document of immense practical kindness. Imagine him sitting at a small table, the sea breeze ruffling the parchment, dictating his final wishes to a scribe. He does not ask for a monument. He does not ask for his works to be canonized. Instead, he worries about the people he loves. He provides for her Phyllis, the woman who has been his companion in his old age. He writes, "She has been good to me," and ensures she is given a talent of silver and the choice of his houses. It is a touching defense of a partner who, under Athenian law, had no legal standing. He worries about his children. He worries about his slaves. In a move that was radical for his time, he orders that none of his slaves be sold, but that they be allowed to age in dignity, and some be granted their freedom. The man who once defined a slave as a living tool in his politics softens at the end into a man who sees the loyalty of those who served him. He remembers his first wife, Pythias, asking that her bones be moved and buried alongside his, as she requested. This will is the final rebuttal to the caricature of Aristotle as a cold, robotic logic chopper. It reveals a heart that was deeply tethered to the specific, fragile humans in his orbit. He is practicing the ethics of friendship to the very last line. He is ensuring that the wax of his life leaves a gentle impression on those who remain. As the illness progresses, confining him to his bed, the internal dialogue likely turns back to the beginning. Does he think of Plato? It is impossible to imagine he does not. In the quiet of the Chalcis nights, the old arguments about forms and universals surely seem distant, like children's games. The distance between the academy and the lyceum vanishes in the face of the ultimate separation. Perhaps he realizes that they were both right in their own way. Plato saw the longing for the eternal. Aristotle saw the beauty of the temporal. Plato looked at death and saw a homecoming. Aristotle looks at death and sees a biological necessity. The final change in a life defined by motion. There is a scholarly debate about whether Aristotle feared death. His philosophy offers no personal afterlife, no Elysian fields where he will meet Socrates and Achilles. For Aristotle, the individual soul, the psyche, is bound to the body. When the heart stops, the self flickers out like a flame when the oil is gone. Only the active intellect, the pure capacity for reason, returns to the cosmos, anonymous and impersonal. This is a chilling prospect for many, but for Aristotle, it may have been a source of calm. He had studied nature all his life. He had seen the leaf fall, the bird die, the season turn. He knew that resistance to nature is the only true madness. He accepts his place in the cycle. He is not a ghost in a machine. He is a part of the machine, and his shift is ending. The days shorten. The light in the room changes from the harsh white of summer to the golden slant of autumn. He can hear the servants moving softly in the hallway. He can hear the wind in the pines. He thinks of the Lyceum, of Theophrastus walking the colonnade. He hopes the maps are safe. He hopes they are still collecting the beetles and the proverbs. He hopes they remember that the why is just as important as the what. On one of his final nights, he might look out at the stars reflecting in the turbulent water of the strait. He had spent his life trying to connect the two, the perfect, unchanging circles of the heavens and the chaotic, shifting tides of the earth. He had built a ladder of logic between them. He had tried to show that the same laws that move the sun also move the stomach of the starfish. He is the man who broke the master's world, yes, but he broke it only to expand it. He broke the glass ceiling of the forms so that he could touch the sky with his own hands. He took the divine down from the pedestal and found it in the dust. The end comes quietly. There is no hemlock, no speech, no weeping crowd of disciples. Just the slow cessation of the pulse. The form releases its hold on the matter. The great categorizer is finally uncategorized. The observer becomes the observed, and in the silence of the room in Chalcis, the mind that contained the entire ancient world, the mind that named the sciences, defined logic, and mapped the soul, finally stops asking questions. The Euripus continues to rush outside, indifferent to the loss. The tides reverse, back and forth, in their endless rhythmic indecision. But inside the house, the decision has been made. The argument is over. The student has graduated. The camera moves one last time, drifting forward through the centuries, blurring the timeline of history. We leave the quiet deathbed in Chalcis. We speed past the fall of Rome, past the dark monasteries where monks carefully copied Aristotle's logic in fading ink, past the golden libraries of Baghdad where Islamic scholars whispered his name as the first teacher. We arrive finally in the high echoing halls of the Vatican in the year 1509. The Renaissance is in full bloom. A young painter named Raphael has just finished a fresco on the wall of the Stanza della Segnatura. It is called the School of Athens. Stand before it. In the center of the vast painted archway, surrounded by a chaotic, vibrant crowd of history's greatest minds, stand two figures. They are walking toward us, frozen in an eternal conversation. On the left is Plato. He is depicted as an old man, modeled after Leonardo da Vinci, with a long white beard and a look of weathered, mystical wisdom. Under his arm, he holds his book, the Timaeus. On the right is Aristotle. He is in the prime of life, handsome, dressed in rich blue and brown robes, holding his ethics. But look at their hands. This single detail captures the entire 16,000-word journey we have just taken. Plato raises his right hand, pointing one finger straight up toward the heavens. He is telling us, look up. The truth is there. The reality is in the forms, in the divine, in the world beyond this cave. Aristotle stretches his right hand out flat, hovering over the ground, palm down. He is telling us, look here. The truth is in the earth. The reality is in the substance, in the balance, in the world we live in. It is the most famous gesture in the history of art, because it is the most fundamental tension in the history of human thought. Raphael understood perfectly that these two men were not enemies. They were the two necessary poles of the human experience. They are the north and south of our intellectual compass. For 2,000 years, civilization has swung back and forth between them like a pendulum. When the Roman Empire collapsed and the world fell into chaos, men turned to Plato. They needed to believe that this broken world was just a shadow, and that a perfect city of God waited for them in heaven. St. Augustine fused Plato with Christianity, creating a theology of the soul that looked upward, ignoring the decaying earth below. But then the pendulum swung back. In the 12th and 13th centuries, Aristotle was rediscovered in the West. His books on logic and biology, preserved by Arab scholars, burst into the medieval universities like a bomb. Thomas Aquinas took Aristotle's unmoved mover and fused it with the Christian God. Suddenly, it became holy to study the earth, to use reason, to catalogue the creation. Science was reborn because Aristotle reminded us to look at the ground. We are still living in their argument today. Every time you hear a debate about human rights, you are hearing Plato. The idea that every human has an invisible, eternal dignity, regardless of their physical utility, is a Platonic form. It is a beautiful, abstract ideal that we strive to reach. But every time you hear a debate about evidence-based policy or climate data, you are hearing Aristotle. The insistence that we must measure the temperature, count the carbon, and adjust our laws to fit the physical reality is pure Aristotelianism. When we are young and dream of changing the world, of building a utopia where no one suffers and everyone is equal, we are Platonists. We are the student in the academy, dazzled by the sun, wanting to burn the shadows away. We want the perfect. When we grow older and realize that utopias often become tyrannies, and that life is about compromise, paying taxes, and caring for our needs, we become Aristotelians. We are the student in the Lyceum, walking the colonnade, accepting the limits of the body. We want the possible. The brilliance of the student who broke the master's world is that he didn't actually break it. He balanced it. Without Aristotle, Plato's idealism would have floated away into a cult of pure mysticism, disconnected from human life. Without Plato, Aristotle's empiricism would have become a dry, soulless catalogue of facts, a dictionary without a plot. We need both hands. We need the finger pointing up to remind us that we are more than just eating, sleeping animals, that we are capable of justice, beauty, and truth. And we need the hand spread flat to remind us that we are biological creatures who must live in a fragile ecosystem, who must eat, build, and negotiate. In the painting, they are friends. They are walking together. They are not looking at each other in anger. They are looking forward, into the future, at us. The silence between them is not an empty silence. It is a harmony. It is the sound of a conversation that has never ended, because it can never end. As we stand in the imaginary colonnade of history, one last time, we can see them clearly. The old wrestler who loved the sky, and the sharp-eyed biologist who loved the earth. They define who we are. We are the dust that dreams of the stars. We are the rational animals. Aristotle was right. Plato is dear to me, but dearer still is truth. But perhaps, in the end, the deepest truth is that we cannot fully understand the ground beneath our feet unless we remember the man who told us to look up at the sun. The student did not destroy the master. He completed him, and so the lecture ends. The scrolls are rolled up, The library is locked. The sun sets over Athens, over Rome, over the world. The voices of the academy and the lyceum fade into the gentle, rhythmic hum of history, leaving us with the final, enduring gift of their friendship, the permission to ask forever what is true. The painting fades. The bright colors of Raphael's fresco dissolve into the soft, grey mist of memory. The echoing halls of the Vatican go quiet, and the stone floors of the Lyceum return to the dust. The arguments are over now. The logic and the myths, the syllogisms and the shadows, all of it settles down like leaves falling on a quiet forest floor. You have walked a long way tonight. You have walked from the sun-drenched olive groves of Athens to the cool caves of Macedon. You have stood by the sea in Lesbos and watched the tides turn. You have seen the rise of empires and the quiet dignity of a lonely room in Chalcis. But now, the journey is done. The history books are closing. The philosophers are resting. Let your own mind drift away from the questions. You do not need to categorize the world tonight. You do not need to find the forms. You only need to rest. The earth is beneath you, steady and sure, just as Aristotle promised. The sky is above you, vast and deep, just as Plato dreamed. You are safe in the balance between them. Let the breathing of the centuries slow down to match your own, in and out, rising and falling. The tide is gentle now. The stars are watching, but they do not demand an answer. They only offer their light. Drift into the quiet. The colonnade is empty. The silence is yours. Sweet dreams.